LoveLore Library. Chapter 528. Shuailan placed Ning Shuima on the futon next to him. Then he took out a few pills and put them in his mouth. One day. If he had one day, he would be able to recover most of his martial arts and do what he wanted to do. Kirin did not dare to look at Han Shanyue's face anymore. Although Master Han had been very calm and did things in an orderly manner, Kirin could sense that Kirin was very sensitive. However, the little Qilin was keenly aware that his mood had always been suppressed, just like the calm before the storm. It couldn't help but be alarmed, and didn't dare to say a single word of nonsense along the way. They had reached the chaotic river and even found the sunken ship. Kirin even fished up a few strands of human hair, a broken jade pendant, and a few broken bones. Kirin still could not feel any trace of Ning Shuima. Fortunately, other than the occasional panic and pain, there were no other symptoms. If Kirin was still alive, it meant that Ning Shuima was also alive. At least, she did not meet with any mishap. Kirin was a little relieved. Logically speaking, since they had already found this place, with Kirin's nose, he should be able to find Ning Shuima's scent and track her down. But, no. He could not smell her scent at all. The surrounding air seemed to have been cleansed by someone. All traces of her scent had been erased. How could this be? The ship had clearly sunk here. Master could not have left early. After Han Shanyue asked Kirin a few questions, he said softly, "The art of disappearing trace." He did not expect Shuailan to be so careful. Could it be that he had already guessed that Han Shanyue was here? Although it was the first time Kirin heard of this art, he could guess from the name. He cursed, that pervert. He was even more worried about his master. He clenched his claws tightly. He did not give up and walked around again. When he came back, he saw a scene that made him stunned. Han Shanyue's sleeves fluttered as he stood on the surface of the river. No one knew what kind of spell he was making, but a chilly wind blew around him. Within the chilly wind, there were faint silhouettes. Soul congregation spell. Generally speaking, to use this kind of technique, one would need to use some magic tools and also do some preparation work. The little Qilin had personally seen the big brother who went into the stone essence cave with it use this kind of technique. The procedures were very complicated, and at that time, it was very tired just watching from the side. Who would have thought that the new heavenly master, Mr. Han Shanyue, would be able to use it so easily? Furthermore, this one move had attracted over 30 of them. It was too awesome. The souls floated around Han Shanyue. More than 20 of them had blank faces, as if they had lost their main souls. They half knelt at Han Shanyue's feet and only knew how to kowtow. They didn't even know how to answer his question. Fortunately, there were still 8 or 9 of them who seemed to be conscious. They bowed and opened their mouths, as if they were answering Han Shanyue's question. Kirin was curious and was about to walk over to take a look when Han Shanyue sent a message, "Stop. You have too much yang energy, it will kill them." Kirin could only wait. After a while, Han Shanyue waved his sleeves and flicked his finger. In the air, a cloud-covered heavenly path appeared, leading straight into the depths of the river. The souls stepped onto the cloud-covered path one by one. Only a female soul seemed reluctant to leave. She surrounded Han Shanyue and kept whining. It seemed like she wanted to stay by his side and be a servant. Chapter 529. The sorcerers in this world did raise little ghosts. Kirin could tell that Master Han was an expert in this field, and he probably lacked little ghosts that could run errands and fight. Kirin thought that he would keep her. But who would have thought that after the little ghost said a few words to Han Shanyue seemed to have lost his patience. He flicked his finger and a white wind flashed by. The female little ghost screamed and her soul was torn into pieces, dissipating in the air in an instant. Kirin was speechless. This master was too heartless. Even if he did not keep the girl by his side, there was no need to destroy her soul, right? It thought that even if he did not keep her, he would still release her soul. This master seemed to be more violent today. Master, you are the guardian of the vast sky kingdom. You should be merciful and fair. You should be afraid of hurting the lives of ants when you sweep the floor. You should protect the lanterns with moths and not hurt the living. That girl only wanted to stay by your side to be a little ghost, that's all. If you scatter her soul like this, won't you lose your godhood? The little Qilin felt that this heavenly master's behavior was a little bit ruining its three views. Han Shanyue glanced at it. Didn't you just get the title of the Master of Heaven? Did he mean that he was not used to this new identity? Kirin nodded. Yes, you just got the title, so you have to follow the rules of the Master of Heaven. Who told you that this is the rule of the Master of Heaven? Han Shanyue's tone was still indifferent. I always follow my heart. I am the Master of Heaven. I am the rule. These words were simply too arrogant. Kirin was not convinced and said, I heard that this rule was set by the Overlord. Do you dare to go against his rules? Are you more powerful than the Overlord? Han Shanyue's eyes flashed and suddenly flicked his finger. A white light flashed by and the little Qilin cried out as it somersaulted and fell straight into the water. You didn't improve much, but your ability to talk nonsense has improved. Han Shanyue's eyes were cold as he looked at it coldly. The little Qilin touched the newly popped green bump on its forehead and jumped out of the water. It was still somewhat puzzled. How did he know that what he said just now was nonsense? Maybe he knew who set the rules of the Master of Heaven. Or maybe he knew the Overlord very well and knew that he would not care about other people's business. Don't think about it. Hurry up and ask them where they went. Han Shanyue's tone was a bit impatient. Ha! Ask who? How? Kirin did not respond. Han Shanyue looked at it as if it was an idiot. Master of the Master of Heaven, is this Qilin fake? Master of Heaven. It had actually forgotten about its innate ability. It coughed. I forgot. It didn't dare to dawdle and immediately used its beast language to summon the monsters in the river to inquire about the whereabouts of Ning Shuama and Qin Wendian. Kirin. Han Shanyue stood there and looked at Kirin Shanyue. This Kirin beast was really going to be raised into a cat. There were a lot of monsters in the river. Although they hadn't gained wisdom, they could still understand the little Qilin's words. They also had an instinctive fear of it, so they didn't hide anything from the little Qilin's questions. Some of the monsters saw the direction that Shuilan and Ning Shuamo escaped. Some of them had chased after Yen Ziyuan. Chapter 530. After all, these monsters did not have intelligence, and their thoughts were still a mess. Moreover, they had an even worse problem, which was that they were colorblind. They did not know who was in red or blue, therefore, when they answered the little Qilin's questions, they were always vague and ambiguous, giving specious answers. These two groups of people were also confused. Kirin had a headache listening to them, and could only reflect their meaning to Han Shanyue. Han Shanyue looked at Kirin with a pained expression. Do you think Shuilan would take the water route? It must be the one that flew in the air. The little Qilin touched the bruise on its forehead with a guilty conscience. It felt that its IQ was a little low recently, but when Han Shanyue looked at it as if it was an idiot, it felt a little hurt. I was too anxious about Master's whereabouts, so I didn't think it through. He did not dare to say any more nonsense, and immediately asked the monsters which direction they flew in. The monsters looked at each other again, and then two monsters spoke. These two monsters saw two groups of people. One group was Shuilan, and the other group was Yi Qingwan. Not only were they colorblind, they were also face-blind. In their eyes, they could not differentiate between men and women. Fortunately, these two groups of people were going in the same direction, so Kirin did not feel too troubled, and told Han Shanhua the details. Han Shanhua left without saying anything, and Kirin hurriedly followed. As long as he knew the general direction, he would be able to catch up to Shuailan. After all, the evading trace consumed a lot of telekinesis, and with Shuailan's current condition, he would not be able to use this method for long, and he would definitely reveal his scent later. Han Shanhua's prediction was correct, and after one man and one beast chased in that direction for about 70 to 80 miles, the scent of Ning Shuima and Shuailan finally appeared in the air. Kirin was happy and worried at the same time. He was happy that he could finally smell his master's scent again. He was worried because his master's scent was entangled with Shuailan's scent. It seemed that his master could not escape from Shuailan's grasp. He did not know if Shuailan, that perverted bastard, had tortured her yet. He was worried, and he said it out loud, "Will that bastard fry my master first and then kill her?" Before he could finish his sentence, Han Shanhua's head was slapped again. Han Shanhua's voice was like ice. "Little apple, if I hear you say that word again, I will cook you first and then fry you." The little Chilin's head was burning, and it didn't dare to speak any more nonsense. It concentrated on sniffing for its master's aura. After searching for about 2 to 3 li, the little Chilin suddenly stopped. Master and Shuailan's scent were disappeared. It circled around the area for a while before finally confirming that it couldn't find it. "Master, did he use the evading trace again?" Kirin was puzzled. Han Shanhua did not answer. He made a hand seal as if he was sensing something. After a while, he said in a deep voice, "He opened the ghost path." Kirin was stunned. Of course, he knew about the ghost path. The ghost path was not an ordinary path in the human world, but a path hidden in the secondary space. This path could only be opened by someone with great telekinesis. For example, in the Kirin clan, only elders had the ability to open it. The ghost path was different from ordinary paths. Ordinary paths had a direction and a beginning and an end. However, the ghost path was directionless and followed the ghost path's will. Chapter 531. Everyone's ghost path was different. Unless they thought of the same destination, they would not meet in the ghost path. Which direction did Shuailan want to go after activating the ghost path? Kirin had no clue at all. He could not help but look at Han Shanhua. Han Shanhua's face was gloomy. After so many years, this was the first time he met such a cunning and troublesome opponent. He flipped his wrist, and a faint golden sound transmission talisman appeared in his palm. Thousands of miles away, on Buddha Lotus Mountain where the Sun-Moon sect was located, the head general manager, who was in charge of all the Sun-Moon sect's affairs, was arranging the day's affairs in his study. One of the white jade walls suddenly lit up with a luster. The head general manager's eyes widened in shock. After being stunned for a moment, he hurriedly knelt in front of the wall and said solemnly, "Ancestor." After the ancestor left the mountain, he would not easily contact them, because there was almost nothing in this world that he could not solve. Even if he contacted them, he would ask about the sect's affairs and so on. When he contacted them, he would use the sound transmission talisman and not the heavenly sound wall. The heavenly sound wall would only be activated by the ancestor when something major happened. And the order from the heavenly sound wall was the highest order. It required all the Sun-Moon sect's disciples to move out in large numbers. There was no room for objection. They had to succeed, they could not fail. The head general manager's heart was thumping wildly. He thought that something major had happened, but he did not expect the faint golden characters on the heavenly sound wall to light up one by one. All disciples, within 1,000 miles of the chaotic river, search for a red-clothed man and a woman with him at all costs. Send news to me within 6 hours. Although the head general manager was bewildered, he did not dare to delay. He immediately replied, "Yes, ancestor." He suddenly stood up and hurriedly went to arrange things. The Sun-Moon sect had more than 10,000 disciples. Who knew how many spies they had arranged in various countries? It could be said that they were intertwined and complicated. In this way, no matter where on this continent there was a change, the Sun-Moon sect would immediately know and make the corresponding arrangements. There was nothing in this world that the Sun-Moon sect did not know. Their intelligence network was richer and more accurate than any other country's. The Sun-Moon sect would not easily interfere with the affairs of these countries. Usually, they would just organize the information. They were detached from the outside world. However, once he interfered, he would use thunderous methods that no one could defy. As for the spies arranged in the various countries, they were all clever and sly people who could take charge of their own affairs. Normally, these people would not be easily touched, as long as they reported to him on time. Now that the ancestor had issued this order, everyone had to move out. A moment later, all the Sun-Moon sect scouts on the entire continent received the same order, to search for the red-robed man within 500 kilometers of the chaotic river. Although everyone received the same orders, the areas they were assigned to search were different. They covered the entire area within 1,000 miles of the chaotic river. These people immediately moved out and began a carpet search around the primal chaos river. As long as the red-clothed man was in the area drawn by the ancestor, even if he hid in a mouse hole, these people could still find him. Kirin naturally did not know that Han Shanhua had just lightly written a few lines of words on the light golden talisman, and had already given an order that could shake the entire world. After he finished writing, he put away the golden talisman. Chapter 532. Kirin stared at him. Subconsciously, it thought that this person was omnipotent and would have a good way to find its master. It was waiting for him to do something else, such as opening the gate of ghost or something. Unexpectedly, after he put away the talisman, he turned around and went ashore. He sat down on a platform and closed his eyes to meditate. At this time, he still had the mood to meditate. Kirin's scales almost stood up. It rushed in front of him, "You're not looking for my master." Han Shanhua ignored it and continued meditating. "She's your concubine. I heard that a concubine is also a kind of wife. Your wife was taken away by another man, aren't you worried?" Kirin was furious. "She's not." Han Shanhua finally spoke. His voice was cold. "She ran away from the marriage." Kirin choked. "She did run away from the marriage. But you don't want her anymore?" It looked up and asked again. Han Shanhua finally opened his eyes. His voice was cold. "Why must I want a girl who ran away before the wedding? Since she ran away, there's no room for her to regret. Then this marriage is not valid." Kirin didn't know what to feel. It was as if it was angry for its master, but also as if it was relieved for its master. After all, it knew that Ningxue Ma was very unwilling to be married to this person as a concubine. Han Shanhua closed his eyes again and didn't speak. "Then you really don't want to look for my master?" Kirin didn't give up. Han Shanhua only replied with one word, "Wait." He had already made arrangements. Those people had already started a carpet search. No matter which side had the news, he would be the first to know. Shui Lan opened the gate of ghost at this place, so this place was the center and radiated in all directions. Therefore, he stayed here to ensure that he would rush over as soon as he got the news. He was now chasing blindly without any direction. Not only would it waste his telekinesis, but it might also be counterproductive if he went in the wrong direction. At this time, it was better to stay still. Therefore, waiting here was the best way. He was never a talkative person, and he didn't like to explain to others. Not to mention explaining to Kiran, who had the intelligence of an 8 or 9-year-old child. Kiran was infuriated by the word wait. Its owner's life was in danger at all times, and it was even more urgent than the fire in the room. Yet, he was actually waiting here calmly. How despicable. Kiran was enraged. He opened his mouth and spat out a large ice ball. He threw it at Han Shanyue. You cold-blooded bastard. No wonder my master is unwilling to marry you. You deserve to be a bachelor. After smashing the puck, it turned around and ran forward. When Han Shanyue was meditating, there was a protective barrier around his body. Even if he was hit, it wouldn't hurt. When the ice ball approached the top of his head, it was blown away by the boundary energy and turned into a pile of small ice balls that fell to the ground. Han Shanyue opened his eyes and looked at the shattered ice balls around him. His lips twitched. This Kiran really needs to be taught a lesson. How dare he throw an ice ball at him? Impulsive and willful, doing things without thinking of the consequences, this personality was a bit like its owners. He looked sideways at Kiran, who was running away. His gaze was faintly complicated. He meditated for a while. In the end, he opened his eyes because of his restlessness. After a while, he sighed and took out a light blue conch from his chest. He used his fingers to cast a spell. Chapter 533. After the faint white light flashed, the blue conch became transparent like crystal and gradually transformed into a ripple-like mirror in front of his eyes. The mirror gradually became clear. What was reflected in it was not Han Shanyue, but a luxurious and romantic building. The hibiscus tent was warm, and the curtains of the bed were lowered. A young master was lying on the bed. As if he had sensed something, the young man who was sleeping soundly suddenly opened his eyes and looked straight at the mirror. Diswa. His lips twitched, and he suddenly sat up. Diswa, why are you snooping in the middle of the night? Fortunately, there were no beauties in his room. Otherwise, it would be embarrassing. Rongyue Tianlan, help me do something. Han Shanyue didn't talk nonsense with him and went straight to the point. The young master was Rongyue Tianlan. When he heard Han Shanyue's words, his eyes immediately brightened. Please instruct me, Diswa. This Diswa didn't easily ask for help. He might not even ask for help once in a few thousand years. Now, he actually asked for help. What a miracle! What could it be that Diswa couldn't solve by himself? Rongyue Tianlan's gossipy cells immediately burned, and his eyes lit up. All his drowsiness disappeared. Use your Heaven's Eye technique to check the surroundings of the primal chaos river. See if there are any abnormal fluctuations of psychokinesis. Find this person. Han Shanyue flashed a portrait of Shuailan in the mirror. Rongyue Tianlan whistled. What a beautiful man. Poetic and picturesque. I didn't expect there to be such a masterpiece in the lower bound. Han Shanyue's eyes twitched, and he said coldly, Stop talking nonsense. Find him quickly. Yes, sir. Rongyue Tianlan jumped off the bed, and his pajamas automatically turned into a light blue robe. He looked like an elegant young man. He was still a little curious. Diswa, this is the first time I see you looking for someone so urgently. Who is this person? A devil cultivator. Han Shanyue only replied with 4 words. No wonder there is a touch of demonic charm and evil aura between his eyebrows. He is a devil cultivator. Diswa painted him so well. It seems like this person left a deep impression on Diswa. Rongyue Tianlan's elegant face was full of gossip. Han Shanyue, Rongyue Tianlan couldn't help but add, Diswa, so, you aren't innately cold, but you are interested in men. You weren't distracted during the chess game because of him, right? Han Shanhue suddenly smiled. He didn't smile easily, but this smile made Rongyue Tianlan shiver. Rongyue Tianlan, if I'm interested in men, I won't let you go. Rongyue Tianlan immediately hugged his own body with a face of chastity. Dizwa, I can shed my blood to be your little attendant, but I will never sell my body. Han Shanhue, Rongyue Tianlan, if you speak any more nonsense then I will go to your carefree island and flatten your fruit trees. This sentence clearly hit Rongyue Tianlan's weak spot. He immediately closed his fan and begged for mercy. Dizwa, can this lowly one be wrong? Don't flatten my trees, they are my lifeblood. If the trees live, I live. If the trees die, I die. I will cast a spell to find him. As he spoke the last sentence, he had already begun to cast a spell. His hands formed a seal, and his body floated up, rushing out of the luxurious building and into the air. The water mirror in front of Han Shanhue, which had been following Rongyue Tianlan, also followed him outside. Chapter 534. In the mirror, Rongyue Tianlan was frequently making incantations in the air. One of his hands slowly opened in the air, and a phoenix eye gradually appeared in his palm. Green light shot out from the phoenix eye, directly into the misty distance. Shui Lan, who was meditating in the ruined temple, suddenly sensed something and looked out of the window. But it was dark outside and he could only see a few stars shining in the sky. He looked at one of the stars and felt that the star was weird, as if it was a pair of God's eyes looking in his direction. He lowered his head and let his long hair cover his face. His robe had been destroyed by Ning Xuemo and he was only wearing a pair of pants. His skin was crystal clear and his proportions were perfect. In the dark night, he shone with a charming light. He looked down at the unconscious Ning Xuemo who was lying on the futon. She was lying there motionlessly and was unusually obedient. After a while, the feeling of being spied on disappeared. Shui Lan slowly raised his head and looked at the sky outside the window. The star that looked like an eye had slowly slid away. It was obvious that it had given up on the ruined temple. Someone actually used the Heaven's Eye technique. Could that person be Han Shanhue? Shui Lan secretly clenched his fist. He was in a hurry to meditate, so he didn't have time to put on a new robe. Now it seemed that he was lucky. And when he was meditating, he restrained his psychokinesis. No one outside should be able to detect the waves of psychokinesis on him. Even if he used the Heaven's Eye technique, he might not be able to find them. But since that person used the Heaven's Eye technique, he might not be able to hide here. He had to think of another way. He stretched out his hand and a small embroidered bag appeared in his palm. The bag was obviously a Qianquan bag for storage. It wasn't big, but there were many things inside. Ning Xuemo only thought that his things were hidden in one of his pockets. She didn't know that he had a storage space. This space was in his mind. If he didn't cast a spell, this space wouldn't appear. The space wasn't big, but it was enough to store a Qianquan bag that could contain everything. The Qianquan bag was light blue in color and had a plum blossom pattern embroidered on it. The embroidery was not exquisite. The shape of the plum blossoms was a little rough, and there were even a few wrong stitches. It was obvious that the person who embroidered this picture was a rookie. A voice drifted into her ears. I'm so smart, but I can't embroider this well. It was too embarrassing. Just throw it away. It was a young girl's voice. It was clean and slightly hoarse, but it was extremely pleasant to the ears. The voice suddenly appeared in his mind. Shui Lan's body stiffened slightly. He tried his best to capture the voice, but it gradually faded away and could no longer be heard. His fingers tightened around the Qianquan bag, and he closed his eyes slightly. He knew that this voice belonged to that person, the person he had forgotten, but sporadic voices would occasionally pop out, causing him to lose focus for a moment. She was the one who sealed him. Logically speaking, he should hate her to the core, but he couldn't bring himself to hate her. However, his memories of her seemed to have been erased by someone, and he couldn't remember her. He couldn't remember what she looked like, and he couldn't remember what had happened between him and her. He only faintly felt that this person was the most important person in his life. Even if he had forgotten her, her existence was still in his subconsciousness. Recently, her voice would occasionally pop out from the depths of his memory. Chapter 535. Shuilan's memories were very fragmented and scattered, and he couldn't connect them together. However, it was enough to make his heart ache. His fingers once again caressed Ning Xuemo's soft cheeks. His fingertips gently rubbed against her lips. "Little girl, you asked me to look for her, but I don't even know who she is," he sighed faintly, "but it doesn't matter. I will find her sooner or later, and ask her for the truth. I may marry her, but I will never let you go." He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He took out a bunch of strange things from his chinkuan bag: knives, scissors, tweezers, all kinds of bottles and jars, and even human skins of different skin colors. "Little Xuemo, you will be shocked when you wake up." He chuckled. His smile was like a flower petal. "Diswa, I didn't find the person you mentioned." After a quarter of an hour, Rongyue Tianlan floated down from the sky and shook his head apologetically. His face was pale. It was obvious that using the Heavenly Eye technique consumed a lot of psyche power. Even the Heavenly Eye technique couldn't find him. Han Shanhua frowned. Could it be that the person who always liked to dress in red had changed his appearance? He didn't use any techniques to walk on the road. This person was unprecedentedly cunning. I wonder if Ning Xuemo suffered any losses in his hands. His heart, which had always been calm, was no longer calm. He slowly clenched his fingers. What method should he use to find him? Diswa, the future is long. No one can escape from your grasp. You can't find him now, but it doesn't mean you can't find him in the future. Just take your time. Rongyue Tianlan comforted him. Han Shanhua didn't speak. His eyes were empty, as if he was thinking. This person is really important to you. Rongyue Tianlan's gossipy nature started to bubble again. He kidnapped my concubine. Han Shanhua didn't want him to continue guessing. Otherwise, he didn't know what Rongyue Tianlan would think. Rongyue Tianlan tripped and almost fell from the roof. He barely stood up. His peach blossom eyes were wide open, and his face was full of shock. What? Diswa, when did you take in a concubine? How come I didn't know? Heavens, didn't you always disdain these kinds of love and affection? Han Shanhua said indifferently, "Do I need your permission to take a concubine? But what about Yunqi?" Rongyue Tianlan almost wanted to scratch his head. He even encouraged Yunqi to pursue happiness. What does me taking a concubine have to do with her? Han Shanhua's voice was even fainter as he raised his hand to turn off the law conch mirror image. Rongyue Tianlan also knew that he had made a slip of the tongue, so he pulled himself together and said, "This red-clothed bastard actually dared to kidnap Diswa's concubine. He must be tired of living. I will help Diswa search again." "Diswa, do you have a portrait of your concubine?" Since he couldn't find Shuilan's whereabouts, perhaps he would start looking for clues from this concubine. Han Shanhua said, "There's no need to trouble you." He naturally had Ning Xuemo's portrait on him, but it was a portrait of her dancing. He didn't want another person to see that kind of portrait. Moreover, if Shuilan was in disguise, he would have done the same for Ning Xuemo. Even if Rongyue Tianlan forced himself to open his heavenly eye again, it wouldn't be of any use. He raised his hand to turn off the law conch mirror. Rongyue Tianlan seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly said, Dizwa, why don't you ask Yunshi for help? Her soul-searching bird is the best at finding people. No matter what that red-clothed man turns into, it can quickly find him. Chapter 536. Han Shangyue nodded slightly and muttered to himself, okay. He turned off the conch. He then took out a white voice transmission talisman and tapped it with his finger. The voice transmission talisman lit up. A moment later, Yinshi's surprised voice came through. Dizwa. It's me, Han Shangyue answered simply, his voice not as cold as before. Yunshi, help me find someone. Yunshi agreed readily. Okay. I'll get the Soul Seeker bird to find him. But, Dizwa, I need something that person often uses. Come to the middle of the chaotic river. Han Shangyue told her the exact location before cutting off the voice transmission talisman. He seemed to have sensed something and raised his head to look. He happened to see that the little Qilin had already rushed back. At this moment, it stopped not far away and angrily looked at him. You're not looking for my master, but you're here flirting with girls. The little Qilin was very eager to learn. It had learned a lot of modern words from Ning Xuemo and Tom. Han Shangyue was speechless. He was too lazy to care about it and wanted to meditate again. Kirin knew that its words carried little weight. No matter what it said, Han Shangyue wouldn't take it to heart. It didn't want to waste its breath, so it told Han Shangyue about its discovery. I found the scent of mermaids and blue phoenixes a few kilometers away. Do you think the disappearance of that bastard with my master has something to do with these two scents? Mermaids and blue phoenixes were very rare in this world. The former was a spirit of the sea and was almost impossible to find on the continent. As for the latter, it was the king of birds, and it would be difficult to find more than a few of them on this continent. It was very unusual that these two had appeared at the chaotic river at the same time. Did it have something to do with the disappearance of its master? Kirin didn't want to let go of any clues, so when it discovered the two scents, it hurried back to tell Han Shangyue and waited for him to analyze it. Although this person was perverted, he was strong enough, smart enough, and calm enough. He might be able to find clues to its master. Han Shangyue pondered for a moment and jumped onto Kirin's back. Bring me there. A moment later, Han Shangyue and Kirin arrived at the beach where Yan Ziyuan had escaped from danger. Sure enough, there was the scent of a mermaid here, and the mermaid seemed to be seriously injured. The unique sweet smell of blood on the mermaid lingered on the riverside for a long time. He naturally sensed the aura of the blue phoenix bird and Yi Qingwan and frowned slightly. He didn't expect her to come here and take away the mermaid. Kirin looked at him eagerly. What do you think? Is it related to master? It has nothing to do with me. Han Shangyue only replied with 2 words, but his eyes were looking into the distance. Han Shanyue's vision was extraordinary. He could see people and things within 100 miles. Han Shanyue's gaze fell on a woman who was stumbling forward. The woman's clothes were tattered, her hair was messy, and her body was even a little wet. She didn't look like an ordinary person. Late at night, a single woman was running through the wilderness. His expression changed. Little Apple, go to a place 80 miles away from here, and bring that woman here. He told Little Apple the exact location. Kirin was stunned and nodded. It immediately followed Han Shanyue's instructions and ran in that direction. It was naturally much faster than the woman and caught up with her in a quarter of an hour. After seeing the woman's description, it was also stunned. Yan Ziyuan. Chapter 537. Yan Ziyuan was running in a hurry. When she heard the call behind her, she subconsciously turned around and staggered. Not far behind her stood a valiant and spirited Kirin, looking quite awe-inspiring. When Kirin was with Ning Xuemo, it had always been in the form of a blue cat, so she did not recognize it. When she suddenly saw this mythical beast, she was so shocked that she took a few steps back. You? How do you know my name? Kirin was not in the mood to explain so much to her. It briefly explained its relationship with Ning Xuemo, and Yan Ziyuan finally understood that it was the cat. She breathed a sigh of relief and finally remembered that the legendary loner Ning Xuemo did have a Kirin by her side. She had been running in fear for half the night. When she saw Kirin now, she felt very close and could rely on it. She could not help but cry. Xuemo was taken away by the red-clothed Guqin player. Kirin, quickly go find the Taoist master and ask him to save her. I'm afraid that she will lose her life if you are late, Kirin interrupted her. I am here on his orders to pick you up. I will take you to see him. After a moment, Yan Ziyuan was already kneeling in front of Han Shangyue. According to his instructions, she told him in detail what had happened on the boat. Han Shangyue listened without saying a word and did not interrupt. Yan Ziyuan felt that the surroundings were getting colder and colder, and the air pressure was getting lower and lower. Kirin was also listening to her on the side, and from time to time, he would curse the red-clothed pervert. When he heard that Yi Feng had taken Ning Xuemo as a hostage to force Shui Lan to release her, Kirin was angry. This Yi Feng is such a bastard. My master was obviously threatened. She was not with that pervert, but he actually used my master as a hostage. That red-clothed pervert did not care about my master at all. Why would she be threatened? Yan Ziyuan could not see Han Shanyue's face clearly, but she felt a pair of sharp eyes looking at her. When she heard Kirin's words, she was a bit sad. Yi Feng was wrong to do this. But at that time, he had no other choice. But the red-clothed Guqin player was indeed threatened, so we were able to escape with our lives. Kirin was stunned for a moment, and said, so the red-clothed evildoer was not completely heartless to my master. When he finished this sentence, he felt that Han Shangyue looked at him, and his body felt a chill. Continue. Han Shangyue spat out these 3 words. Yan Ziyuan explained everything in detail. After she finished, she kowtowed to him, Great Master, I beg you to save Shui Shui. Xuemo. It is really dangerous for her to stay by the red-clothed Guqin player's side. Also, please save the mermaid. It is Ziyuan's savior. If it is taken away by Yi Qianbei, I don't know what will happen to it. She kowtowed incessantly. Han Shangyue stood up and faintly said, Ning Xuemo is my person. There is no need for you to beg. I will save her myself. You can go. He turned around and was about to leave. Yan Ziyuan heard him say this and was a bit relieved. But there was still the mermaid in Yi Qinghuan's hands. She quickly chased after him. Master, that mermaid, Yi Feng's life is not over yet. Han Shangyue only left these 6 words, and then rode away on Kirin. Yan Ziyuan was stunned. It was as if thunder had struck her. Yi Feng. Yi Feng. The mermaid who risked his life to save her was actually Yi Feng. Yi Feng was actually a mermaid. How could it be? Her head was buzzing. She sat on the ground with a thump. Her mind was filled with Yi Feng. Chapter 538. Yan Ziyuan's secret guard had always been by her side. He had shielded her from the wind and rain, saved her life several times, and was willing to do anything for her. But what about her response? She had treated him coldly several times. She had given him a hard slap. She thought that Yi Feng had finally abandoned her at the most critical moment. It turned out that he hadn't. He had only been injured and turned back into a mermaid. Then, he had risked his life to save her, Yi Feng. Yi Feng. Yan Ziyuan jumped up. No, she had to save him. He had always been the one saving her. This time, it was her turn to save him. She also knew that this Mr. Han Shanyue was a famous fortune-teller. His predictions were almost iron-mouthed. No one would doubt his predictions. Furthermore, they would all be verified without a single mistake. Han Shanyue had said that Yi Feng wouldn't die, which made her feel more at ease. However, how could she truly feel at ease if she didn't see him escape with her own eyes? She turned around and dashed away. She knew where Yi Qingluan's residence was. She wanted to take a look and explore. When Yunxi appeared in front of Kirin's line of sight riding on a winged snow lion, Kirin's eyes widened. A fairy! It couldn't believe that it had met such an elegant and fairy-like fairy in such a dark and murky place. Snow as skin and jade as bones, this was exactly her. She was elegant and refined. Her actions carried a natural immortal aura. The muddy primal chaos river seemed to have become much brighter because of her arrival. Looking at her, Kirin couldn't help but think of its master. Its master was also a beauty, but compared to this woman, she seemed a little lacking. At least, its master had the aura of the mortal world, but this woman was so beautiful that she didn't have a trace of the mortal world. Mr. Yunxi floated down from the snow lion's back and bowed to Han Shanyue. He was actually here to look for this big block of ice. Kirin's ears immediately perked up, and its eyes widened. It looked at Yunxi from head to toe, and then from her feet to her head. This woman was so perfect from head to toe. Even her bearing was impeccable. What was her relationship with Han Shanyue? Mr. D. Wasn't his surname Han? Or was he using a fake name in front of its master? He really doesn't have any sincerity towards master. It would rather tell this woman its real name than tell its master. At this moment, Kirin's heart was filled with countless complaints. Its eyes returned to Han Shanyue. This big block of ice was actually smiling. Although the smile was very faint, it still made Kirin feel uncomfortable. This big block of ice had never smiled like this in front of its master before. Even his tone wasn't as cold as before. Yunxi, where's your soul-searching bird? Yunxi smiled sweetly. Here. She opened her jade-like fingers, and a snow-white bird the size of a parrot appeared in her palm. The bird was still nodding off, as if it had not yet awoken. Yunxi gently touched its blood-red, hook-like mouth with her finger and said gently, "Little white, get up and get to work." After being teased by her, the bird finally opened its eyes unwillingly. When it suddenly saw Han Shanyue, its golden eyes lit up, and it jumped onto Yunxi's shoulder. Then, it bowed respectfully to Han Shanyue, as if it was paying respects. Han Shanyue waved his sleeves and said, "There's no need for these formalities. Let it find someone." A dress appeared in his palm. This is her dress, so it should have her scent. Chapter 539. Yunxi didn't dare delay. She immediately waved her hand to let the soul-searching bird sniff. Her pair of beautiful eyes also fell on that set of clothes. It was a woman's dress. Judging by the length of the dress, the owner seemed to be a little girl. Kirin's eyes widened. It had recognized that the dress was the one Ning Xuema had worn before she had soaked in the hot spring. She had only been 13 years old at that time. It was unexpected that Mr. Han had kept this dress. While the soul-searching bird was sniffing, Yunxi asked casually, "Sir, are you looking for the owner of this dress? Is it a little girl?" Han Shanyue nodded slightly but didn't say anything. "Is she your new disciple?" Yunxi was even more curious. Han Shanyue glanced at her lightly. "Yunxi, I asked you to look for someone. Do you have to interrogate me?" Yunxi froze for a moment and smiled sweetly. "I was just curious." "Okay, I won't ask anymore." The little Qilin at the side couldn't hold it in any longer. It was most annoyed by people who spoke halfway and were unhappy with half of what they wanted to say, which made it feel somewhat suffocated. It immediately said, "My master isn't his disciple. She's his concubine." As soon as he said this, Yunxi's pretty face turned pale and she stumbled. Her eyes widened as she asked, "What?" She looked at Han Shangyue in shock and disbelief. Sir, you have a concubine." Han Shangyue frowned slightly and said indifferently, "I did indeed have a marriage agreement with her. I took her as a concubine." Why? Yunxi's eyes widened. "Do I need to ask why?" Han Shangyue glanced at her and said flatly, "There's no reason. I took her because I wanted to." But... Yunxi stuttered. "But what?" "But sir, haven't you always, never been involved in relationships?" Yunxi still hadn't recovered from her shock. "Who told you that I took her in because of relationships?" Han Shangyue's voice was even fainter. "It wasn't because of relationships. Could it be that he had other difficulties?" Yunxi's heart, which had sunk to the bottom of the lake, finally rose a little. "Then why?" Han Shangyue's expression turned cold. "Yunxi, I have no obligation to answer your questions. If you don't want to, then forget it." Yunxi hurriedly said, "Sir, please don't take offense. She was just curious." Yunxi will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire for Mister's orders. The soul-searching bird was indeed useful. After it sniffed Ning Xuema's clothes, it circled in the sky a few times. Suddenly, it raised its head and screeched. Then, it shot off in a certain direction like an arrow. The sky in the distance was already turning white. A dilapidated temple rustled in the autumn wind, dim and desolate. This place was 800 miles away from the primal chaos river. It was located in the middle of a wilderness. In the distance, there were a few scattered tombs and an empty village. There must have been people here a long time ago, otherwise, there wouldn't be this temple. However, with the passage of time, the village declined and the temple was abandoned. The temple was empty. There was not a single person in sight, but there were signs that someone had been here. The soul-searching bird dived into the temple and circled the praying mat on the ground, chirping non-stop. Yunxi immediately said, "Sir, it said that she used to rest here." Actually, Kirin didn't need her to say anything. It knew that its master had been here before, because there were remnants of Ning Xuema's aura and that perverted Shuilan's. Chapter 540. Han Shangyue's gaze was fixed on the praying mat. After a moment of silence, he suddenly reached out and picked up the praying mat, turning it over and over to examine it carefully. He even brought it close to his nose to sniff it. Yunxi's eyes almost fell out of their sockets. After knowing him for so many years, she knew better than anyone else how misophobic Han Shangyue was. Even if a golden praying mat was placed in front of him, he wouldn't even look at it, let alone this gray praying mat. Now, he had picked it up and was even sniffing it. How worried was he about that girl that he was behaving in such an unusual manner? Was that little girl really a concubine that he had taken in through a scheme of power? Her fingers had already dug into her palms, but she didn't realize it. She forced herself to stay awake and pretended to be calm as she looked at Han Shangyue. She was as bright, beautiful, and noble as usual. Han Shangyue lightly hit the praying mat a few times. A few strands of red silk floated through the cracks of the praying mat and landed in his palm. His gaze fell on the strands of red silk, and his gaze was ice cold. Kirin jumped to his side and sniffed the praying mat. Suddenly, it cried out, "My master once lay on it. There is blood on it." It glanced at the red silk in Han Shangyue's palm and sniffed it again. "My master's scent is also on it." She had been kidnapped by a devilish man and had once laid on the praying mat. There was blood and torn cloth. The combination of these three elements gave people a lot of room for imagination. Yunshi blurted out, "Could it be that she was already?" Before she could finish her sentence, Han Shangyue glanced at her. His gaze was sharp and cold, causing Yunshi to feel a chill in her heart. She didn't finish her sentence. Instead, she sighed softly. "They have already left this place. Let's look elsewhere." Kirin was still naive and didn't understand. It looked at Yunshi with its round eyes and said seriously, "What are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that my master has already been killed by that man?" "Of course not. I established a blood contract with her. If she was really killed, would be dead too." Yunshi glanced at Han Shangyue and sighed softly. "This child is really cute." She raised her hand and wanted to rub Kirin's horn. Kirin dodged with a jump. Its horn could only be touched by its master, no one else was allowed to touch it. Yunshi's hand froze for a moment before she put it down. She obviously wouldn't stoop to Kirin's level, so she just nodded and looked at Kirin in surprise. She had already learned from Kirin's words that it was the missing girl's pet beast. She was a little puzzled that such a Kirin beast had been tamed by an ordinary girl. Now that he heard the words blood contract, he couldn't help but be stunned. He looked at Han Shangyue with a complicated expression. "Sir, did you help her tame this Kirin?" He even established a blood contract for them. Han Shanyue's sleeves fluttered as he walked out. "They left 4 hours ago. Let's continue the search." He took the lead and walked out of the temple without answering Yunshi's question. Yunshi froze on the spot for a moment as she watched Kirin run out. Her red lips pursed slightly as she followed after him. "Sir, this Kirin is really cute," Yunshi praised Kirin as she walked side by side with Han Shangyue. "Oh," Han Shangyue replied with one word. "Sir, Yunshi also wants a pet beast like this." Yunshi looked at the little Qilin with a hint of envy in her eyes. Chapter 541. Don't you already have a winged snow lion? Han Shangyue finally replied to her with a long sentence. The snow lion had always been by Yunshi's side. It obviously understood human language and immediately rubbed its head against Yunshi's hand. Yunshi sighed faintly and raised her hand to stroke the snow lion's fur. "Yes, this snow lion was also given to me by Mr. I like it very much, but Little White is a terrestrial beast and I lack an aquatic beast. Mister, when you are free, can you catch a Qilin for me as a mount?" Before Han Shangyue could say anything, Kirin had already jumped up. Qilins are mythical beasts. They won't be anyone's pet. Do you think Qilins are water buffaloes? That you can catch one casually? Her words were too insulting to the Qilin family. Yunshi was stunned. But aren't you that girl's pet?" Kirin said angrily, "I'm not a pet. We're friends. She won't treat me as a pet. Then I also want a Qilin that I can establish a blood contract with. I can also treat it as a friend." Yunshi didn't give up and looked at Han Shangyue. "Sir, don't you think so?" Han Shangyue turned to look at her. "Is this your condition for helping me find someone?" Yunshi was stunned. "Of course, not. Sir, Yunshi is just. If this is your condition for helping me find someone, I can agree to it. After 100 years, I will give you a Qilin beast. But our friendship ends here." Han Shanyue's voice was cold and indifferent. Yunshi's expression changed and she hurriedly said, "Sir, you're thinking too much. Yunshi isn't using this as a bargaining chip. Sir and Yunshi are close friends, so it's natural for me to help you find someone." Yunshi just thought that Kirin was fun and said it casually. "Sir, please don't take offense." Han Shangyue glanced at her. "This is your only chance to get a Qilin beast. You really don't want it? No, I don't want it. Our friendship isn't something a Chilean beast can compare to. Sir, just take it as a joke. Yunshi didn't dare to say anything about Kirin again. She lowered her head as a hint of sadness flashed in her eyes. Yunshi, after this matter is over, I can give you another rare beast as a reward for your hard work. Yunshi sighed and said seriously, Mister, I've always treated you as my best friend. Even if you asked me to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a sea of flames, I wouldn't even frown, let alone find someone for you. What does Sir think of Yunshi? Her eyes dimmed. Could it be that Sir has never treated Yunshi as a friend? If Sir continues to say such things, Yunshi will really be heartbroken. Han Shanyue nodded slightly and said, You don't have to worry too much. I originally wanted to make it up to you. Since you don't want it, then forget it. The group followed behind the soul-searching bird. The two humans and two beasts naturally traveled at an unprecedented speed. A distance of 100 miles was only the time it took to brew a cup of tea for them. Signs of human habitation finally appeared in front of them. It was a small city. Although it was not big, it was very prosperous. It was already early in the morning. Although the sun had only risen halfway, most of the people in the small city had already woken up, gone to work, and opened the market. From time to time, people would walk by in twos and threes on the narrow streets. There were also early cars that sped by on the streets. Small merchants and peddlers were hawking their wares along the streets. It was a scene of prosperity and prosperity. Chapter 542. This city wasn't big, and the people were simple and honest. Because it was located in a remote area, there weren't many officials and nobles who came here, so there weren't many opportunities to see outsiders. Han Shanyue and Yunshi were outstanding in both appearance and dress, so when they walked side by side on the street, many people stopped to look at them. The man was like a jade tree in the wind, and the woman was like a flower in a courtyard. They were already a very eye-catching combination, and with the majestic mythological beasts following them, they were even more eye-catching. The number of people who turned to look at them was 100%. Kirin's ears were sharp, so she heard a few words of praise from the people on the street. Phrases such as a match made in heaven, a perfect pair, and so on were more common. Kirin looked at the two people walking side by side in front of her and couldn't help but feel upset. He was her master's husband. How could he be a match made in heaven with another woman? If her master saw this, she would be furious. Han Shanyue was used to doing things his own way, so he didn't care about how others looked at him. In any case, no one could see his face. As for the gossip, he just treated it as a breeze and pretended not to hear it. Kirin was about to rush between them and separate the two people who were an eyesore. However, they did not expect that from the other end of the long street, an incomparably ostentatious carriage would rush towards them at full speed. Yunshi also heard the discussions around her, and her heart beat wildly. She looked at Han Shanyue, who was walking beside her, and her mind was slightly intoxicated. In this moment of distraction, she didn't notice the carriage rushing in front of her. Be careful. Her sleeve was pulled by someone, and she narrowly avoided the carriage. When the carriage passed by, it brought a strong gust of wind that lifted her long hair. She was shocked and cried out softly as she threw herself into the arms of the person next to her. The person next to her stiffened slightly and pulled her back a little. Then, he pushed her away. Yunshi. Han Shanyue frowned slightly. This was the first time he had seen Yunshi act so carelessly. Although the carriage was fast, with Yunshi's skills, she should have been able to dodge it easily. She shouldn't have stood there foolishly like other weak women, waiting to be hit. Yunshi's pretty face turned slightly pale. She brushed her hair and smiled bitterly. I can't stand the smell of those coarse rouge and powder. Every time I smell it, I feel dizzy. The same goes for the soul-searching bird. As if to prove her words, the soul-searching bird flapping its wings in front of her seemed to have drunk too much. It flew in a figure 8 in the air and plummeted down. Yunshi raised her sleeve and caught the bird in her hand. Just now, when the carriage passed by, there was a lot of chatter and the smell of cosmetics was really strong. At that time, Han Shangyue subconsciously held his breath. The carriage had already passed by, but the smell of cosmetics was still lingering in the air, giving people a headache. How is it? Han Shangyue frowned as his gaze landed on the soul-seeking bird that was shaking its legs and pretending to be dead. Let it rest for a while. It's best to purify the surrounding air. This bird is more sensitive to the smell of cosmetics. Yunshi fanned the soul-searching bird with her little hand. In order to get the bird to get up early to work, Han Shangyue waved his sleeve gently. A whirlwind instantly appeared on the street. It spun around the entire street and gradually dissipated in the distance. After the whirlwind passed, the smell of cosmetics was indeed gone. It was as fresh as if it had just rained. Chapter 543. Yunshi naturally knew that this was all thanks to Han Shangyue, so she smiled sweetly. Thank you, Mr. Han Shangyue nodded slightly. Can it look for someone now? It should be able to. Yunshi released the bird again. The bird swayed for a bit before finally moving forward again. This kind of bird followed the aura of the person it was looking for. In other words, it had to go to every place that Ning Xuema had gone to. When the soul-searching bird stopped in front of a building and started chirping non-stop, it refused to fly forward no matter what. Yunshi was stunned. She looked at the small building in front of her, which was covered in colorful gauze and hung with countless red lanterns. She smiled bitterly. The soul-searching bird said that she went inside. Han Shangyue raised his head and looked at the small building. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly. It was obviously a brothel. The women in the brothel were usually open at night, so it was very cold and cheerless in the early morning. There weren't any gorgeously dressed ladies upstairs. There was only a servant downstairs, who was sitting at the door and dozing off. Yunshi frowned slightly. What a strong smell of mortal powder. Mister, the soul-searching bird won't enter this place. You. Before she could finish her sentence, a breeze blew past her. Han Shangyue had disappeared without a trace. He had obviously gone into the brothel to look for someone. How could Kirin remain calm when it heard that its owner was inside? Even if it was a brothel, it would break into a brothel. It leaped up and flew toward the small building as well. Yunshi stood there, her face pale. Dizwa was such a clean freak, yet he had entered such a filthy place for that woman. What was that woman's position in his heart? Concubine. In this world, a concubine was something that could be casually discarded. If the men here were happy, they could casually give away their concubines. Why would they care? They wouldn't change their habits that they had maintained for thousands of years for a concubine. What kind of person was that woman? How could she make Dizwa treat her like this? Yunshi clenched her fists tightly. Suddenly, she steeled her heart and floated into the air, heading towards the small building. It was easy to imagine what kind of scenery there would be in the brothel in the morning. Han Shanyue's search was very fast. Wherever he went, he woke up many pairs of lovebirds, causing a commotion. When Yunshi finally caught up with him, he had just startled a pair of wild lovebirds that were having sex early in the morning. This pair of lovebirds was enjoying themselves when Han Shanyue suddenly barged in. The man was so scared that he almost couldn't get up. He jumped up from the bed and roared, "Which bastard is it?" Before he could finish cursing, his vision went black. He fell on the bed with a plop. He was on top of the woman who was still in a daze. The woman immediately screamed. Before they could say anything, A large blanket came down on them, covering their naked bodies from head to toe. When Yunshi went in, she didn't even get a clear look at the two white shadows before her eyes were covered by a brocade handkerchief. "Go outside and wait, Yunshi." Han Shanyue's voice rang out not far from her. Yunshi only felt a strong force pushing her away. By the time she reacted, she was already outside the door. She lifted her hand and took off the brocade handkerchief. When she looked at it, she couldn't help but take a whiff. This was Dee's brocade handkerchief. It was filled with his refreshing scent. Chapter 544. Deeswa was quite considerate towards her. Yunshi's face was filled with joy. He had been afraid of seeing those dirty scenes, so he had covered her eyes with a brocade handkerchief. Her heart was beating wildly as she carefully put away the brocade handkerchief. Before Yunshi could finish her thoughts, Kirin had also come out. Han Shanyue wasn't so polite to it. "Get out of here." Kirin had obviously been thrown out. It staggered in the corridor, but it quickly steadied itself. It was still unconvinced. "Why can you see it, but I can't? Isn't it just a fight between demons? It's not like I haven't seen it before." It had asked its master about this question, and its master had told it that naked men and women rolling around together was called a fight between demons. Yunshi was speechless. Her face and ears were red. She finally understood what the two white things were that she didn't have time to see clearly just now. She was too embarrassed to stay there any longer, so she turned and flew down the small building to wait outside. After the commotion, the other people in the small building woke up with a start. It was a mess. Some people were shouting, some were yelling, and some were shouting to capture the assassin. There were many hired thugs and tortoise slaves in the brothel. They all rushed up, wanting to capture the person who had dared to barge in. Yunshi was waiting downstairs from afar. She had heard the commotion upstairs, but she wasn't worried about Han Shanyue. It was undoubtedly a fool's dream for the people here to capture him. They would be lucky if they didn't get slapped to death. A moment later, the chaotic brothel suddenly quieted down. The shouting people seemed to have been suppressed by someone's aura. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Yunshi also held her breath. Had he found the person he was looking for? That girl had been brought to this place. Her chastity had probably been lost. If that girl had lost her chastity, how could she still be worthy of Deeswa? Actually, even if she hadn't lost her chastity, she still wouldn't be worthy. Now that she had lost her chastity, she was even less worthy. She even felt that being Deeswa's maid was dirty. Just as she was thinking about this, Han Shanyue's figure appeared upstairs. He lowered his sleeves and said, "Yunshi, let the soul-searching bird come up." Could it be that he didn't find it? Yunshi's heart was in a mess. She didn't know if she was hoping to find him or not. She didn't dare delay, so her figure flashed and she floated up. Her clothes fluttered as she landed upstairs. Han Shanyue must have used a spell to clear the air in this building. The unique smell of cosmetics in the brothel had already disappeared without a trace. The soul-searching bird circled around the building for a while before flying straight into one of the rooms. Han Shanyue's expression changed slightly as he followed him in. This room was obviously a courtesan's boudoir. Chapter 545. That bastard. He had actually brought Shuemo here. He had even let her sleep on such a dirty bed. Han Shanyue turned around and asked the trembling brothel keeper, "Where did the girl who slept here go last night?" His aura was too strong, and his voice was too cold. The brothel keeper was so scared that her eyes were wide open, and she couldn't speak. Yunshi had no choice but to soften her voice and help her ask. She had a gentle personality, and she finally managed to calm the brothel keeper down. However, although the brothel keeper's mind was normal, she was obviously confused. "This is Huan Chui's room." She has been sleeping here all this time. She turned around and called for Huan Shui. A young girl dressed in green walked out from the group of women and answered in a trembling voice, "This is indeed my room. I was in this room all last night." She paused for a moment, then continued, "I even received a guest. Ning Shuama had been lying here, and this woman had been receiving a guest. She had been doing such dirty things beside her." Han Shanyue slowly clenched his fingers and waved his sleeve. The woman named Huan Shui screamed and fell down the stairs. Fortunately, the building wasn't very high, so she wasn't seriously injured from the fall. She was only temporarily crippled, so she scrambled to another room and didn't dare to come out again. Kirin jumped up. "That's not right." Han Shanyue looked at it. "What's not right?" Kirin said, "That woman didn't fight in this room just now. There's no such smell here. There was actually a special smell of adrenaline when a man and a woman made love." Kirin smelled it a few more times, so it had experience. Han Shanyue was speechless. He instantly understood. The woman named Huan Shui didn't dare to lie at this time. She had probably been bewitched and received a guest in another room. After all, the rooms here were all similar. Shuilan. Shuilan seemed to have thought of everything. He was as cunning as an old fox. He had made Shuama sleep here for half the night. Where had he gone after that? He looked at Yunxi. To be exact, he was looking at the bird in her palm. Let it continue searching. Upon hearing this, the bird flew up and circled around the building. This time, it didn't choose a direction to fly in. Instead, it landed and chirped at Yunxi. Yunxi frowned and said, "Sir, the soul-searching bird said that it can't sense anything now." Can't sense it? How could he not sense it? Was Ning Shuama still in this building? It was impossible that he couldn't find it. The most likely reason for this was that the person had smeared Ning Shuama's body with a scent that the soul-searching bird hated, so that it could no longer search for her. The smell of disgust, that car. That carriage with the thick smell of cosmetics. He turned his head and immediately asked the brothel keeper, "Are there any girls here who are sent out? How many of you left just now?" The brothel keeper was at a loss. "We don't go out in the morning, and no girls go out." After hearing what she said, the horse carriage became even more suspicious. Could it be that Ning Shuama was in that carriage? Had he just brushed past her? Han Shanyue turned around and wanted to leave. The brothel keeper muttered to herself. Suddenly, she seemed to remember something and slapped her head. "I remember now. I have a younger sister who came home this morning. She asked me to lend her a few top girls. They just left." Han Shanyue paused. That carriage belonged to the brothel keeper? Then there was nothing suspicious. Chapter 546. Han Shanyue paused for a moment before flying down the stairs. Yunxi and Kirin hurriedly followed, and the two of them disappeared in the blink of an eye. The brothel keeper was dumbfounded. This was like seeing a ghost in broad daylight. She had actually seen two top-notch men in one night. Two. Who was the other one? The brothel keeper vaguely felt that she had seen a handsome guy, but she couldn't remember who he was. A courtesan walked over and asked her in surprise, "Mother, when did you have a younger sister?" How did I remember that Mother was an orphan? I wanted to ask Mother this morning, but I didn't dare to ask. That woman even took away a few of our ladies. The brothel keeper was speechless. Her head buzzed, and she seemed to have finally reacted. Yes, she didn't have a younger sister. Her family was all dead, and she was the only one left. Then who was the woman she had affectionately sent away early in the morning? Wait a minute. That woman had taken away 5 or 6 of her ladies. The brothel keeper felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She jumped up and said, hurry up and check for me. Which ladies were taken away? She was usually so stingy that she would calculate and spend even one tael of silver. Now that so many ladies had been taken away, she felt as if she was about to die. After a moment of chaos, someone came back and reported, "Mother, it was Peony, Jasmine, and 6 others. All of them were her top ladies." The brothel keeper broke down. "Hurry up and chase after them." The slaves didn't move. "Mother, you swore that you would give those ladies to your so-called younger sister. If you go back on your word and chase after them, you will be struck by lightning from the heavens." The brothel keeper was speechless. When Ning Xuemo really woke up, she was in a carriage. Then, she was a little stunned. There were 6 seductively dressed women around Ning Xuemo. The smell of their cosmetics rushed into her nose, causing her to sneeze loudly as soon as she opened her eyes. "You're awake. Mother, you're awake. Oh, Mother, you're awake. Mother, are you tired from lying down? Let me massage your legs for you." Those women were frighteningly passionate and attentive. "Mother. Mother." Ning Xuemo turned over and tried to sit up. Where was she now? Was this a dream? Or did she transmigrate in her sleep again? As soon as she moved, the 6 beauties held her down one after another. "Mother, your body is still very weak. It's better for you to rest." "That's right, Mom. You don't look well." Peony's heart aches just looking at her. The 6 beauties took turns kissing each other. Ning Xuemo only felt her head buzzing and her head swelling up by a size. She didn't have much strength in her body, so she couldn't move after being pressed down by these 6 women. This scene was too strange. It was almost the same as when she had just transmigrated to Ning Xuemo's mansion and was locked in an iron cage. "Bring me a mirror," she said. Even she herself was shocked by the sound she made. Her voice had also changed. The originally delicate and crisp lowly voice had become old and hoarse. She was simply like an old woman in her 60s or 70s. The women couldn't help but look at each other when they saw her distorted expression. The women might forget to bring other things when they went out, but mirrors were indispensable. Immediately, someone took out a smooth bronze mirror and handed it to her. Chapter 547. Ning Xuemo raised her hand to take the mirror. She looked into the mirror and felt as if she had been hit by a stick. Even her breathing almost stopped. What appeared in the mirror was an old lady with wrinkles on her face. Her hair was white and she looked like a nouveau riche with a few gold hairpins. Her small eyes were slightly squinted. Her mouth was already shriveled, but her lips were painted red. Oh my God! Who was the old witch in the mirror? Was it her? Ning Xuemo's gaze fell on her hand that was holding the mirror. Her hand that used to be delicate had become like the bark of an old pine tree. There were also spots of age spots on the back of her hand. Thud. The mirror fell from her hand. She had always thought of herself as a calm empress. No matter what strange things happened to her, she would be able to stay calm and find the best solution. This was also the reason why she had always been proud of herself. But now, she could no longer stay calm. Her head was buzzing. Countless images flashed before her eyes. Shui Lan had cast a voodoo spell on her. Not long after she ran out, she was violently pulled back and crashed into Shui Lan's arms. Then, she felt pain and numbness all over her body. In her daze, she heard Shui Lan talking to her. Then, she completely fainted. When she woke up, she had turned into this old witch. What kind of mother was she? Was someone forcing her to age? Or did she die as Ning Xuemo in her previous life and transmigrated into this old pimp's body? No matter which one it was enough for her to break down. When she transmigrated into a 12 or 13-year-old girl, God did not treat her too badly. After all, she was a beautiful girl. Even if she was a good-for-nothing, she could accept it and work hard with that identity. But now, she had turned into an old lady. How could Ning Xuema, who always cared about her appearance, accept this? She tried her best to calm herself down. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. She raised her arm and rolled up her sleeves, revealing a large part of her arm. She wore a few gold bracelets on her wrist. When she raised her arm, they made a series of clanging sounds. The skin on her arm that was hidden in her sleeves was also loose. It was no different from an old lady's arm. She was still unwilling to give up and decided to touch herself. But no matter where he touched, the skin on her body was loose. Every time he touched it, there would be a handful of wrinkles. Ning Xuema was about to cry. Heavens, let another bolt of divine lightning strike her. She did not want to transmigrate into an old lady. Don't be a brothel keeper. This was challenging her bottom line. When the women saw her grief-stricken appearance, they all tried to comfort her. It was nothing more than that her mother's body would recover and there was no need to worry. It would have been better if they hadn't comforted her. The more they comforted her, the more miserable Ning Xuema felt. She was already dizzy, and now that these women were quarreling, her head hurt even more. Shut up, all of you. After all, she was used to being the boss, so she acted quickly. Although her voice was hoarse, it was very imposing, faintly overflowing with killing intent. The women shuddered. Everybody felt the hair on their back stood up, they were indescribably scared. Sure enough, they all shut their mouths and stared at Ning Xuema anxiously. Old lady, why do you have to be so angry? Now that we have so many girls, our days will get better and better. A voice came from the corner. It was also old and hoarse, but it was a man's voice. Old lady. Why did this name sound so strange? So scary. Chapter 548. Ning Xuema looked in the direction of the voice and found that there was an old man sitting in the corner of the carriage. He had the same wrinkled skin and white hair. He was also dressed like a nouveau riche. His face even looked a little wretched. He looked like a pimp in the movies. At this moment, his pair of muddy eyes were looking at her helplessly. Needless to say, this man was the husband of this old body of hers. Ning Xuema couldn't bear the blow and closed her eyes. She really wanted to die at this moment. She raised her hand and pulled out a hairpin from her head and directly stabbed it into her heart. Since she could transmigrate after she died, she wanted to transmigrate again. Even if she was beaten to death, she wouldn't be a wrinkled old woman. Amidst the women's cries of alarm, her wrist was tightly gripped by someone. Old woman, we're about to have a good life. Why do you want to die? That old man's movements were actually very fast. He actually managed to grab her wrist in the nick of time. The hand on her wrist was slightly warm. There were also age spots and old pine bark. However, when he grabbed her wrist, it didn't feel rough. Moreover, the strength was very precise. It didn't hurt her, and she couldn't break free. Okay, old woman, I know you feel bad because your legs are useless. Don't worry, I will always take care of you and won't let you suffer any grievances. The pimp patted her hand as if he was coaxing a child. His actions made the other girls envious as well. In their line of work, their lives were like floating duckweed. Although there were many men around them, how many of them could be entrusted with their lives? Most of the women in the brothel had a miserable fate in the end. Not to mention marrying a high official, it was already a blessing if they could marry an ordinary man who cared about them. Now, the old woman in front of her was ugly and paralyzed. This old man actually treated her so well. She really met the right person. This body was actually a paralyzed person. Ning Xuema felt like she was hit by a stick again. She stared at the old man. No one knew what she was thinking. The old man sighed and raised his hand to stroke her hair. Old woman, don't think too much. Do you want to drink some water to moisten your throat? He was probably afraid that she would try to kill herself again, so he simply removed the sharp hairpins on her head. Then, he carried her in his arms and let her drink the honey water that he had just made. It was probably due to the smell of the girl's cosmetics in the carriage that Ning Xuema could smell the same scent on the old man's body. When she was helped up and laid in his arms, goosebumps rose all over her body. She subconsciously pushed the bowl away. I won't drink it. It had been 3 to 4 minutes since she woke up, and her mind, which had been struck by lightning, finally began to calm down. He vaguely sensed that something was not right here. She could faintly feel that her carriage was moving very fast. Although she was covered with thick bedding, she still felt a little bumpy. The bumpy ride made her bones hurt. She sensed that there was no psychokinesis in her body. Even the inner force that she was so proud of had disappeared without a trace. She could not feel her legs. She wanted to move her legs, but the nerves in her body did not direct her in that direction. Sure enough, she was paralyzed. She threw a tantrum and did not give the old man a good face. The old man was not angry. He just smiled and rubbed her hair to comfort her. Chapter 549. He bent down and whispered in her ear, "Old woman, your hair is messy. Let me comb it for you." His warm breath by her ear made the hair on the back of Ning Xuema's neck stand up. She raised her hand and tried to push him away. "Get out of my way." The old man held her hand again. "Old woman, your temper is getting worse and worse. It's not good for your health." He tried his best to persuade her. It seemed that he was thinking about her. Ning Xuema felt like she was going to explode under the envious gazes of the other women. She took a deep breath and then another. "Open the window. It's suffocating." The smell of cosmetics in the carriage was so strong that her brain almost stopped working. The old man sighed. "Old woman, you have typhoid fever. It's not suitable for you to be exposed to the cold wind. You can't open the window." Just as he said that, the carriage suddenly jolted. The half-closed window opened a little and the fresh wind blew in. Ning Xuema was slightly refreshed. Suddenly, a light voice came from outside the carriage. "Be careful." This voice was so familiar. Ning Xuema's body suddenly stiffened and she subconsciously looked out of the window. Through the half-closed window, she saw Han Shanhua jumping to the side with a woman in his arms. The carriage moved very quickly, and this scene flashed before her eyes. She didn't even have time to see the face of the woman in his arms. She only vaguely felt that the woman was very beautiful. She even saw the majestic snow-white lion with 2 pairs of wings beside the woman. Then, she heard him call out, "Yunshi." Then, she heard the gentle voice of the woman. "Yunshi can't stand the smell of coarse cosmetics. Every time she smells it, she feels dizzy. So does the soul-searching bird." She subconsciously looked back and saw Han Shanhua standing beside the woman. He seemed to be looking at the bird in her hand and was even fanning the bird with his sleeve. At that moment, the sunlight shone on the golden boy and jade girl, as if inlaid with a circle of faint silver light. It was warm and peaceful. Inside the carriage, the girls chattered and laughed. Ning Xuema could no longer hear the conversation between Han Shanhua and the girl. She suddenly didn't want to listen anymore. Why was he here? Who was the woman beside him? What was their relationship? Most importantly, she saw an old acquaintance. Did this mean that she was still in this era? What year is it now? Ning Xuema suddenly asked a girl beside her. The girl was startled and replied, "It's the autumn equinox of Lucien's 38th year." After answering, she asked in astonishment, "Mama, you even forgot the year?" Ning Xuema's heart seems to have a flash of lightning. It's still the same era, and this day is only one day away from when she fell into Shui Lan's hands and was plotted against by him. "Old woman, what's wrong?" The old man hugged her tightly. Ning Xuema stared at him coldly. "Who are you?" The old man's eyes flashed with surprise. "Old woman, what's wrong?" "I'm your husband." "Then what's your name?" "What's my name?" "Where is our customs clearance document?" Ning Xuema asked several questions in one breath. The old man sighed. "You're confused because you're sick. You even forgot your name. I'm called Shui Fenghua. As for you, you're called Wei Chenhua. Here, this is our customs clearance document." Chapter 550. Two customs clearance documents were placed next to Ning Xuema's hand. Ning Xuema clenched her teeth and took the documents. She glanced at them. The names on the documents were exactly the same as what the old man had said. Wei Chenhua. Unexpectedly, she had the same name as Wei Xiaobao's mother. Ning Xuema stared at the old man. After staring for a moment, her eyes revealed a hint of doubt. "So it's like this." She lowered her eyelids and sighed. "I actually can't remember anything." The old man smiled and hugged her. "Chenhua, don't worry. Even if you forget everything, it doesn't matter. It's fine as long as I remember everything. I will always be by your side." His deep affection made Ning Xuema feel nauseous. Ning Xuema forced a smile. She looked at the peach blossoms and lioli around her. "Who are these lively little girls?" "They were given to you by your older sister. Our hopes for the rest of our lives are all on them. After we go back, we will open a lovely spring courtyard. With these beautiful girls, our customers will definitely come rolling in." The old man outlined a beautiful blueprint for her future life. Ning Xuema sighed. At this time, she seemed to have finally accepted her fate. These girls are indeed lively. Each and every one of them are like spring onions. She closed her eyes again. After resting for a moment, she opened her eyes again. "What's wrong with my legs? How come I can't even feel them now?" The old man said, "You probably caught a cold. Since the day before yesterday, you suddenly couldn't move." That's right, that's right. Mama, at that time, Master carried you to our courtyard. I really didn't expect that you were our Wei Mama's younger sister." A girl named Peony at the side spoke quickly. She giggled as she talked about the situation at that time. Ning Xuema seemed to be curious. "Wei Mama. Which courtyard did you originally belong to?" "We are the girls from your biological sister Wei Qiuhua's courtyard. That courtyard is called Yi Zhanghong. It is quite famous in this small town." Peony opened her chatterbox. "Actually, our Mama Wei has always declared to the outside world that she is an orphan, so when Master came to visit while carrying you, it really gave us a fright. What's more, I didn't expect that Mama Wei would give us to you without saying anything. You should know that our Mama is a famous miser." She seemed to realize that she had said something wrong, so she pursed her lips and stopped talking. Ning Xuema was at a loss again. "So I have an older sister. My head is buzzing right now, and I can't remember anything. I don't even remember entering your courtyard." "Mother, you were unconscious at the time, so of course you don't remember," Peony explained. "Master carried you here and has been waiting on you in the room since. When we left this morning, it was also old Master who carried you into the carriage. Old Master is so considerate to Mother, it really makes people envious." Ning Xuema raised her head and rubbed her eyebrows. "I see. She glanced at the old man who had been hugging her and said with concern, "Old man, so you did so many things while I was unconscious. Are you tired? It's fine if you put me down. Go over there and rest, okay?" That old man didn't seem to think that she would accept her fate so quickly. He carefully looked at her eyebrows and eyes. "Chunhua, are you all right?" Ning Xuema slightly shook her head. "I have to live according to the person I was reincarnated as. Since I'm now Wei Chunhua, I naturally have to live well." Reincarnated. Chunhua, do you think you've reincarnated? If you reincarnated, shouldn't you be a child? At this moment, the carriage had already left the city and was rushing through a wilderness. The road was not wide, and there were occasional potholes. On both sides of the road were large tracts of farmland. It was already autumn, and the crops in the farmland were tall, like a continuous array of green gauze curtains. "The air outside is really good." Ning Xuema sighed. She simply opened the window and used her hand to lean against the window to admire the scenery outside. She could not exert any strength in the lower half of her body. Sitting like this was somewhat strenuous, so she could only rely on her arms to support herself. She seemed to have exerted a little more strength, and the golden bracelet on her wrist knocked against the window. Not only did it abrade her wrist, but it also accidentally fell off her wrist and rolled out of the window. Chapter 552. "Aya, my bracelet." Ning Xuema cried out in distress, "Stop the carriage, stop the carriage." Just as the coachman outside was about to stop the carriage, the old man in the carriage opened his eyes. "If it's lost, it's lost. We still have to hurry on. I'll buy you a new one later." He instructed the coachman to continue moving. Ning Xuema was angry. "Old man, you don't know how to live well. This golden bracelet is worth a lot of money. What's the trouble of picking it up? Stop the carriage, stop the carriage." The old man couldn't persuade her, so he ordered the carriage to stop the carriage and asked a girl to pick it up. Ning Xuema's face tensed up. "Old man, I remember that the bracelet was a token of our love. I don't want someone else to pick it up." The old man was stunned and frowned. "It's just a bracelet. It doesn't matter who picks it up. Their legs are more nimble." Ning Xuema glared at him. You said that you would treat me well for the rest of my life. You don't understand the hearts of women at all." She was like an 18 or 19-year-old girl. The girls in the carriage were shocked by her and had goosebumps. They thought in their hearts, "She's really an old witch. She's so old yet she's still acting like a spoiled child." However, they all spoke up for her, saying that it was better for the lover to pick up the token of love. The old man was in a hurry and didn't want to be delayed by such a small matter. He looked at Ning Xuema and couldn't help but sigh. Okay, I'll go down and pick it up for you." Sure enough, he jumped off the carriage shakily and walked towards the bracelet. The carriage had already moved forward for a while and the bracelet was dozens of meters away from the carriage. When he was about to reach the bracelet, he suddenly heard a scream behind him. He subconsciously turned around and saw that the carriage had turned around for some reason. It meant that the carriage was going back. Ning Xuema, who had been staying in the carriage, jumped out of the carriage. She didn't jump off the carriage but slapped the coachman off the carriage. Then, a golden light flashed in her palm and she stabbed the butt of the horse pulling the carriage. The horse pulling the carriage was in pain and screamed. It was shocked. Then, he spread his hooves and pulled the carriage towards him. The old man was startled, and his body subconsciously dodged to the side of the road. The carriage swept past him like a gust of wind, and madly rushed back the way it came. Damn it! He had been tricked by that girl. A sharp light flashed in the old man's eyes. but he stood still. He had planted a heart-linking venomous insect on her body. Once she ran 2 miles away, she would automatically fly back to him. At that time, he would teach her a lesson. The girls in the carriage panicked and screamed. Then, Ning Xuema's stern shout made them completely shut up. That's the red-clothed zither demon who specializes in killing women. If you don't want to die, shut up. All the girls were stunned. The news about the red-clothed zither demon had spread like wildfire recently, so they had naturally heard about it. Ning Xuema didn't allow them to be in a daze. She stretched out her hand and said, "Quick, prick your fingers and drip your blood on my palm. I have a way to get you out of here." At this time, she had a kind of dignity that made people believe in her. Those girls looked at each other. In the end, they were still afraid of the red-clothed zither demon. Although they were skeptical, they still pricked their fingers with the golden hairpin and dripped their blood on Ning Xuema's broken palm. Their blood dripped on the wound, but it didn't flow out. Instead, it directly seeped into her wound. Chapter 553. Ning Xuema's arm was in severe pain. Beads of sweat seeped out of her forehead, but the corner of her mouth faintly revealed a smile. She could feel that something was cruising along the veins in her arm, approaching the wound on her palm. The frightened horse ran very fast, and in the blink of an eye, it had already traveled more than 2 miles. That old man was naturally Shui Lan. He was originally waiting for Ning Xuema to fly back on her own. However, he did not expect that when the carriage was about to become a small black dot, Ning Xuema still had no intention of flying back. Damn it. It seemed like this girl really knew how to use the heart-linking venom. She even knew how to use the blood of a prostitute to make the heart-linking venom temporarily lose its effect. This girl clearly knew his ability. She could not escape from his grasp with her own strength, so what was the purpose of her running for her life? Furthermore, she had turned back and was running towards the direction of the small town. Han Shangyue. She must be planning to go back and ask for help from Han Shangyue. It turned out that the moment she saw Han Shangyue, she already had the idea of running away. Once she met up with Han Shangyue, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven to catch her. What a cunning little girl. She was so sure that Han Shangyue would save her. Shui Lan was naturally unwilling to let the cooked duck fly away. He no longer cared about pretending to be an old man and quickly chased after her. After all, he was still injured. Although he had recovered part of his strength through meditation, he was still weak and his speed was not as fast as before. Even so, his running speed was still faster than the carriage. In just a moment, the distance between the two sides had closed. The girls who were hiding in the carriage saw him running towards them and were all scared pale. This old man was indeed not an ordinary old man. How could an ordinary old man run so fast? Shui Lan's voice came from behind. "Little girl, you better stop the carriage as soon as possible. Otherwise, if I catch you, I'll skin you alive." Ning Xuema clenched her teeth and leaned against the shaft of the carriage. In her hand was the golden hairpin she had stolen from Peony's hair. She acted as if she didn't hear his threat. Not only did she not stop the carriage, she even stabbed the horse's butt. The horse was simply furious. It was already running so fast, but its butt was still stabbed. Did she still have any humanity? It spread its hooves even more, causing the carriage to jump like crazy, and its ponytail also swung wildly. Ning Xuema was close to the horse's butt, so she was inevitably hit by the horse's tail. Her cheeks burned with pain, but she clenched her teeth and endured it. This was her only chance to escape. If she missed this chance, she did not know what would happen to her. Han Shangyue, I hope you are still here. I hope you are still in the town. Horse's tail, the horse's tail, the horse's tail, the horse. Shuailan threatened Ning Xuemo with a few words, but it did not work. Instead, it made this girl crazily jump the horse's butt. He finally knew that threatening her was useless, so he immediately changed his target. The girls in the carriage, listen up. Quickly make her stop the carriage. Otherwise, even if I don't do anything to her, I will peel off your skin and break your bones, torturing you to death. The 6 girls in the carriage had never experienced this kind of situation before. They were already dizzy from the running carriage, so when they heard this threat, their faces became even paler. With his speed, Ning Xuemo's carriage wouldn't be able to enter the city before he caught up with it. Someone in the car cried out, "Stop the car, stop the car. I don't want to die. I don't want to die." Ning Xuemo turned a deaf ear. Things had already come to this point, and she could only try her best to move forward. Han Shangyue, Han Shangyue. How good would it be if you could leave the city at this time? Would you save me? Would you save me? At this most dangerous time, the only person she could think of to save her life was him. 8, 9. Shuailan was still counting. His counting sound was like a death knell. Chapter 555. These counting sounds were like the urging of death. The other women in the carriage could no longer hold themselves back. They didn't want to die. 3 women looked at each other, and almost at the same time, their bodies suddenly jumped out of the carriage. One of them tried to pull Ning Xuemo's legs while the other 2 tried to pull her arms to get the reins back. They were trying their best. Ning Xuemo didn't have much strength and the acupuncture points on her legs were sealed. She was like a paralyzed person. It was difficult for her to deal with these 3 women. She didn't want to kill them. She even wanted to save their lives. If she had let Shuailan take her away, she might not have died, but these women wouldn't have lived long. With Shuailan's methods, they would most likely be sacrificed to the zither. Even if they died, their souls would be incomplete. She was trying to save them by risking her life to escape. However, these women didn't know the whole story. Ning Xuemo didn't have time to explain it to them. These women thought that she was selfish and only wanted to escape. She didn't care about their lives. At this critical moment, they wanted to stop her to please Shuailan. The 3 women were trying their best. Ning Xuemo couldn't get rid of them. Seeing that the reins were about to be taken away by them, she made up her mind and waved the golden hairpin in her hand. Although she didn't have much strength, she was able to accurately identify the acupuncture points. One of the women who was about to take her whip was hit in the waist acupuncture point. The woman's body went soft and she lost all her strength. She was slapped off the carriage by Ning Xuemo. She was merciful and used a lot of strength. The woman flew out of the carriage and fell on the side of the road instead of falling under the wheels of the carriage. After dealing with one, the other one was easy to deal with. She used the same method to get her off the carriage. The 2 women rolled on the ground and their faces were covered in dirt. Before they could sit up, Shuailan arrived. He only said one sentence, "Useless things." These were the last words the 2 women heard in the mortal world. Then, their bodies collapsed and turned into puddles of smelly water. Of the 6 women in the carriage, only 3 were left. The woman who was still holding on to Ning Xuemo's leg was so scared that her whole body went soft. She didn't dare to hold on to Ning Xuemo's body anymore. She rolled and crawled back into the carriage and hugged the other 2 women, trembling. Shuailan was getting closer and closer. The 3 women looked through the car window and could almost see the wrinkles on his face. Before he caught up, they had already keenly felt the strong killing intent on his body, which made them feel cold all over. He had already counted to 10. Once he caught up to them, none of them would be able to survive. The desire to survive gave birth to great courage. One of the women suddenly picked up a bag beside her and threw it out of the window. The cloth bundle fell apart, and the floor was littered with clothes and miscellaneous items. There were even bottles and jars that were rolling around. There were rouge and powder. Shuilan was in a hurry to catch up. These things were rolling around under his feet. He had to avoid them, so his speed was naturally a bit slower. You too, quickly throw things down. The more scattered, the better. Peony stood at the window and shouted. The other two women were indeed looking for things to throw down. When these women went out, they naturally brought along a lot of luggage. Those cloth bundles were all placed in a corner. The two women didn't care about anything else and casually threw down those large and small bundles. Chapter 556. The two women didn't care about anything else. They carried all the bags over and gave them to Peony to throw down continuously. This method was indeed not bad. It slightly slowed down Shuilan's footsteps. In addition, with the bags being thrown out, the carriage became lighter and lighter. The horse was able to pull it with less effort, and its speed also increased. The distance between the two finally increased a little. From the moment Ningshuama seized the carriage and ran until now, only a short 10 minutes had passed. However, it was a 10 minutes of life and death struggle. The Grim Reaper's scythe was hanging above their heads. Everyone's nerves were so tense that they almost broke. Finally, all the items in the carriage were thrown out. There was nothing left to throw. Shuilan quickly caught up again. At this moment, their carriage was less than 2 li away from the city gate. However, this 2 li distance was like a natural moat that could not be crossed. There seemed to be a white robe fluttering in front of the city gate. Was it him? Was it him? Ningshuama made up her mind. She didn't care about anything else and opened her mouth to shout. Suddenly, she heard a cry of alarm behind her. A black shadow flashed, and a wisp of wind directly attacked an acupuncture point on her lower back. Her body went numb, and the cry was stuck in her throat. She couldn't shout anymore. Then, the galloping horse let out a long neigh. A person stood up, and the carriage suddenly swayed, almost flipping over. Ningshuama's mute acupoint was sealed, so she couldn't make a sound. In any case, her upper body was still free. She took advantage of the time when the carriage was about to flip over and the person holding her was swaying. She suddenly stabbed out with the golden hairpin in her hand. Shuilan finally caught up with the carriage at the last moment. He sealed Ningshuama's acupoint, held her in his arms, and then went to control the horse. The series of movements were like moving clouds and flowing water. However, he had been chasing them for a long time. At this moment, the carriage suddenly swayed, and he, who was holding Ningshuama, also swayed. At this time, Ningshuama's desperate attack with the hairpin came stabbing over without any warning. Her stabbing position was extremely tricky, and her speed was fast enough to catch Shuilan off guard. She had actually stabbed him in the ribs. Because he was running, his blood qi was circulating very quickly. He let out a muffled groan and fresh blood gushed out. Ningshuama, who was in his arms, also groaned. It seemed that the effect of the heart-linking voodoo was about to be restored. Because of the heart-linking goo, the pain she suffered was far greater than Shuilan. But in such a desperate situation, she couldn't care less. Taking advantage of the moment when Shuilan was trembling from the pain, she suddenly struggled and broke free from Shuilan's grasp. Chapter 557. Unexpectedly, as soon as she stretched out her hand, the fairy-like young girl in front of her retreated smoothly. She obviously thought that she was dirty. Shuilan's eyes darkened. He jumped down and bent down to pick up Ningshuama. The moment he touched Ningshuama's body, he sealed her acupoints so that she could no longer move. His arms were hot, but Ning Xuemo's heart was cold. She had tried so hard, but she still couldn't escape. Old woman, are you okay? Are you hurt? Shui Lan hugged Ning Xuemo with a concerned look on his face as he patted the dust off her body. As the dust flew, Yinshi calmly took a few steps back. I'm sorry, Mississippi. I almost dirted you. Shui Lan smiled apologetically at Yunshi. Yunshi naturally didn't care about these ordinary people, nor did she want to lower herself to their level. Thus, she just nodded and said, "It's okay." At this moment, the horse had already stopped there. It was unknown whether or not the three women in the carriage had been restrained by Shui Lan, but they were obediently sitting in the carriage without any movement. Shui Lan shook his head and sighed as he bent over to carry Ning Xuemo into the carriage. He muttered, "Sigh, it's good that you didn't break your arms or legs. I'll check on you later." Although he spoke with concern, he secretly sent a telepathic message to Ning Xuemo. "Little Xuemo, you can't escape from me. How dare you plot against me like this? I'll settle the score with you later." Ning Xuemo simply closed her eyes. She had tried her best, but she still ended up like this. It was fate. Perhaps she was really at odds with this era and was no longer suitable to stay here. If she died in Shui Lan's hands, she might be able to transmigrate back. Then, he would wake up in his own era and continue his carefree life. She was then placed back into the carriage. The other three women were actually not harmed. They were curled up in the corner of the carriage, trembling. Shui Lan's gaze swept over them, and the three of them immediately shrunk their heads like frightened chicks. "Yunshi, what's going on?" A cold voice suddenly sounded from outside the carriage. Ning Xuemo's body instantly stiffened. Han Shangyue. It was Han Shanyue's voice. He's finally here. But everything here had already been settled. Would he discover her? Outside, Yunshi was already smiling as she said, "It's fine." The horse in this carriage was startled and almost flipped over. Fortunately, the people inside restrained it. "It's fine now." "Sir, do you have any other clues?" "No." Han Shanyue replied faintly, "Let's go." The footsteps of the person outside gradually faded away. He really didn't notice her. As expected, he didn't notice her presence. That's right, why would such a high and mighty person like him notice such an ordinary carriage? Ning Xuemo was enveloped in immense despair. She closed her eyes. At this point, she could only resign herself to fate. "You want to ask him for help?" Shui Lan's voice sounded with ill intentions. His lips curled into a faint smile. "Do you think he'll save you? Do you remember what day it is today? It's your big day with him. You ran away from his wedding and embarrassed him in front of everyone. I'm afraid he already hates you. Not to mention that he didn't recognize you. Even if he did, he wouldn't do anything. I've heard that he has a strange fetish. He's obsessed with mental cleanliness. Whatever he throws away, no matter how magical or precious it is, he won't look back." Chapter 558. Ning Xuemo ignored him. She also had a bad habit. If she liked something, she would pursue it with all her might and try to get it. But the prerequisite was that the thing was ownerless. Once she found out that it belonged to someone else, she would give up completely. She would not let the thing that she liked entangle her heart. If she wanted to do something, she would be the only one. She would rather not be the only one. This was also the reason why she ran away from Han Shanyue. Even if she had a slight liking for him, she was slightly moved. But she did not want to be his concubine. "Little Xuemo, are you regretting it?" Shui Lan leaned close to her ear, almost biting it. Regret? Regret running away from Han Shanyue? No, she did not regret it. If she could do it all over again, she would still run away. The only thing she regretted was that she did not leave Daliang City and went to participate in some zither recital. She was too lazy to respond to Shuailan. She just closed her eyes and did not move. Shuailan did not want to delay any longer. Han Shangyue and the others had just left. He had to take Ning Xuema and run as far away as possible. Now that he was facing Han Shangyue, he had no chance of winning. He had already killed the coachman. Now he could only drive the carriage himself. Fortunately, the others in the carriage were under his control and would not go against him. Ning Xuema had a few acupuncture points sealed by him. She was like a mummy. She could not speak or move. She was not a threat. He bent down and walked out of the carriage. He sat on the shaft of the carriage and was about to start the carriage. And the sudden change happened in an instant. A thunderous force came towards Shuailan. Fortunately, Shuailan's reaction was extremely fast. When that power was about to hit his body, he abruptly flipped his body, dodging the front of that power. At least he was not blasted into the sky, but the force came too quickly and suddenly. Although he dodged it, he was still hit by the force. His body flipped off the carriage like a paper kite. He groaned and fell to the ground. His chest was hit, and he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. In such a life-and-death situation, he did not dare to be negligent. He rolled on the ground and was about to jump up. Shuailan, you can go die now. A cold voice rang out, and a white light flashed, cutting straight towards him. The light was ferocious, as if it had the power to destroy the heavens and the earth. Its aura was so strong that even the sun in the sky seemed to lose its color. Murderous intent filled the sky. It was actually a soul-destroying killing move. Shuailan's expression changed drastically. He rolled away with all his might, trying to avoid the white light. However, the white light followed him like a shadow, and he couldn't avoid it at all. He suddenly laughed out loud. I planted a heart-linking goo on her. After saying this, he straightened his body and stopped dodging. Just as the white light touched her clothes, it abruptly stopped. Although the blade-like murderous aura had disappeared, the hurricane brought about by the killing move was still there, tearing apart the clothes on Shuailan's body. Finally, the crimson robe was exposed, causing him to stagger. He retreated 20 to 30 steps before he could barely stand firm. He steadied himself and looked at Han Shangyue, who had returned at some point. How did you recognize me? Han Shanyue's white robe fluttered as he stood on the carriage, completely ignoring him. Chapter 559. Han Shanyue's white robe fluttered as he stood on top of the carriage. He simply ignored Diswa and waved his sleeves, causing the carriage to split apart like a piece of paper. 4 people were revealed in the carriage. 3 young girls were trembling as they sat, and an old woman was lying motionlessly on the ground, seemingly vomiting blood. Han Shanyue swept his gaze across the faces of the 4 people, and his gaze immediately locked onto the old woman. He bent down slightly and picked her up. Yunshi, who had just arrived, was stunned. Diswa, who was obsessed with cleanliness, was actually carrying a dirty old woman in his arms. There was even dirt on her body and blood stains on her face. Even if the sun had suddenly risen from the south, she wouldn't have been so surprised. She stood in place and stared blankly at him. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to ask something, but in the end, she closed it again. Ning Xuema had never thought that there would be such a light at the end of the tunnel. Even when she was held in his arms, she still couldn't believe that she had really been saved. Her nose was filled with the extremely light and pleasant smell of his body, and her ears were filled with his steady heartbeat. His body temperature was slightly lower, but it made her feel inexplicably at ease. She stared at him with wide eyes and opened her mouth, but no words came out. A line of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth again. The heart-linking voodoo had not been removed. Just now, he had only temporarily suppressed a small characteristic of it, such as the ability to increase the distance between two people. However, the most basic characteristic had not changed. For example, if Shui Lan was injured, Ning Xuema would also be injured. Han Shanyue frowned slightly, and his fingers rested on her wrist. After a moment, he lifted his sleeve and brushed her body. Ning Xuema's sealed acupoints were finally unsealed. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." He only said 4 words to her. Although it was just 4 words, Ning Xuema's heart felt as if it had been struck by a heavy blow. Her heartstrings trembled slightly, and the rims of her eyes became slightly hot. She actually had the urge to cry. The corner of her mouth also gently pulled up. "Thank you." Her voice was still hoarse. As soon as the words left her mouth, she finally remembered her current appearance. Her body slightly stiffened. Han Shanyue's arm tightened slightly as he glanced at her. "You don't have to be polite with me." At the side, Yunxi's complexion was faintly pale. A dark light seemed to flash through her eyes. Suddenly, her figure rose, and with a wave of her finger, countless small snow-white swords flew out from her sleeves and directly attacked Shui Lan like a violent storm. Die, demon. Her skill was extremely high. Her snow-white sword emitted an inch-long light. With the sound of the wind, she surrounded Shui Lan in an instant. She wanted nothing more than to kill this devil Shui Lan with her sword. Her move was too sudden. Not to mention Shui Lan, even Han Shanyue could not react in time. If it was any other time, Shui Lan would not be afraid of her, but he was already at the end of his rope. As soon as he saw those small swords coming, he knew something was wrong and was about to defend himself with all his might. Suddenly, a white sleeve flew out and wrapped around all the small swords, allowing Shui Lan to escape this calamity. Yunxi's expression changed slightly. "Teacher. This person is a great demon who has done many evil deeds. If we don't get rid of him, he will become a threat in the future." Han Shanyue glanced at her. His gaze was as cold as ice, causing Yunxi to shiver. She did not dare to continue her questioning. Han Shanyue did not bother with her anymore. With a shake of his sleeve, a white light flashed, and the small swords that were wrapped around by his sleeve turned into white mist and dissipated. Although Ning Xuema's acupuncture points had been unsealed, they had been sealed for too long. Her legs were still in a semi-paralyzed state. Chapter 560. She was not used to being hugged. Once she regained her freedom, she wanted to get down. But just as she moved her body, Han Shanyue's arm tightened. "Be good, don't move." Although his tone was cold, it was as if he was coaxing a child. Ning Xuema's body slightly stiffened, a strange feeling rose in her heart, and for a moment she could not think of what to say. She also did not know why, but in his arms, she felt unusually at ease, and finally felt pain all over her body. First, Shui Lan had sealed her acupuncture points, causing her blood flow to be obstructed. Then she was hit by his heart-linking insect. He was injured, she was also injured. Then she was lying on the shaft of the carriage, being pulled by the crazy horse all the way. Just now she was in a hurry to escape and did not feel anything, but now that she was relaxed, her body finally felt uncomfortable. She only felt pain all over her body, soreness everywhere, and even her face was a little hot. She could not help but frown. Han Shanyue looked down at her and spat out 2 words, "So ugly." Ning Xuema's body stiffened, once again remembering her current appearance of an old lady, or a dirty old lady. A beauty's frown is as beautiful as a painting. An old lady's frown, mother, it's disgusting. Don't hug me if you think I'm ugly. Why are you still hugging me in his arms? She pushed him, wanting him to let go. But as soon as she pushed him, she found 2 black and red bird's claw marks on his white shirt. Ning Xuemo looked at the 2 bird's claw marks, and finally felt a burning pain in her 2 little hands. Just now she held the golden hairpin and poked the horses, but not only did the horses but become bloody, her palms were also scratched. Behave. He growled again. Naturally he also saw her black claw marks, and he frowned in disgust. A palm pressed against her back. Ning Xuemo only felt her back was warm, and there was a warm air flowing around her body. Wherever it passed, the soreness in her body gradually disappeared. Even the dirt on her body was automatically removed. Han Shan was single-handedly healed Ning Xuemo, but his eyes fell on Shuilan. He coldly said, "Shuilan, I'll give you 2 choices. First, remove the heart-linking goo and I will let you go. Secondly, if you don't remove the heart-linking goo for her, I have my own ways to restrain you and take you away. Once I remove the goo worm for her, your time of death will come." Shuilan leaned against the trunk of a big tree on the side of the road and smiled coldly. "You can cure this goo." Han Shan's expression was also distant. "You don't need to use any effort to solve it, and I can't be considered too troublesome. I just need to take a bit of your heart's blood, then add blood grass, sky leaf flower, and sky river water. That's enough." He actually said it exactly. Shuilan narrowed his eyes. "I didn't expect you to know about this." Han Shanyue was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. "Which one do you choose?" Shuilan smiled. He clearly had the appearance of an old man, but his smile had a kind of evil aura. He slowly opened his mouth. "Actually, I have a third choice." As he spoke, he took out a sparkling blue knife from nowhere and placed it in front of his chest. "I can use self-harm to force you to let her go." Han Shanyue's expression changed slightly. Before the heart-linking goo was removed, Shuilan's self-harm was equivalent to testing the knife on Ning Xuemo. If he was injured, Ning Xuemo would be injured twice. He was a demon, so he wouldn't die easily no matter how many injuries he suffered. Chapter 561. The knife in Shuilan's hand was clearly not a normal knife. It was cold and had a strange light, making his eyes seem like they were filled with a ghostly aura. His knife was already close to his chest, but he still had a smile on his face. "Han Shanyue, if we're talking about ruthlessness, you can't compare to me. Can you bear to see her hurt? Can you bear to see her hurt?" Han Shanyue's eyebrows jumped, but before he could open his mouth, Ning Xuemo suddenly moved. She held the golden hairpin in her hand and pressed it against her chest. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Shuilan, I won't go with you. I'd rather die if I go with you. As for the pain you speak of, pain really doesn't mean anything to me." As soon as she finished speaking, she raised the hairpin and stabbed it into her own arm. Her stab was not light, as it went into her flesh by 1 or 2 inches. Blood immediately flowed out. "Ning Xuemo, don't be stupid." Han Shanyue raised his hand and grabbed her wrist, preventing her from hurting herself again. Ning Xuemo's face was pale from the pain, but she still smiled. "I'm only doing this to tell you one thing. If you hand me over to him, I'd rather die." Her gaze fell on Shuilan, and her voice was cold. "Shuilan, I'm not ruthless. Pain really doesn't mean anything to me. If you don't believe me, then try hurting yourself." This time it was Shuilan's turn to be speechless. His gaze fell on her arm that was still bleeding, and his pupils shrank. He suddenly sighed. "All right, you win." The blue knife in his hand disappeared, and he calmly smiled at Han Shanyue. "I choose the first option. But the reason I chose this is not because I'm afraid of you, but because I'm afraid of her. I'm afraid she'll kill herself." He looked at Ning Xuemo and sighed. "Little Xuemo, I only wanted to keep you by my side. Do you hate me so much?" Ning Xuema had long been immune to his affections, so she smiled back at him. Her smile was gentle, but her words were not gentle at all. I can't wait for you to die. Shui Lan choked and looked at her gently. But I want you to live in this world for a long time. Ning Xuema. Was this bastard's face made of iron? It was unprecedentedly thick. Shui Lan was also straightforward. Since he had chosen the first option, he didn't dawdle. He pointed at a certain part of his arm and flicked a blood-red bead towards Han Shangyue. Han Shangyue took it and looked at it. After confirming that it was indeed the antidote, he passed it to Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema didn't care about anything else and swallowed it. The heart-linking goo poison couldn't be seen from the pulse. Ning Xuema sensed her body, but she didn't feel anything. Shui Lan glanced at her. Suddenly, he used his palm as a knife and cut his own arm. His arm was cut open and blood gushed out. Ning Xuema didn't expect him to do this and was secretly shocked. Her body tensed up and she subconsciously waited for the pain to come, but it didn't. She didn't feel anything. The heart-linking goo poison was really broken. Ning Xuema couldn't help but look at Shui Lan again. That guy lost such a large piece of flesh on his arm, but he was still fine. When he saw her looking at him, he even smiled at her. Little Xuema, it's not that I can't beat you, it's just that I can't bear to part with you. He didn't look at Han Shangyue and the others anymore and turned around to leave. He was in a good mood and sang as he walked, the sun rises in the east, red clothes like fire. The spring flowers are bright, the night is waning. Holding the beauty in my arms, my heart is sad. The past is hard to recall, the zither is hard to reconcile. Chapter 562. His voice was actually very pleasant to listen to. It was deep and hoarse. His voice echoed on the main road and gradually faded away. Yunxi looked at his back and clenched her fists. Sir, this demon is very powerful. I'm afraid that it will become a problem in the future. Han Shangyue was also looking at Shui Lan's back. His eyes flickered slightly. He vaguely felt that the tune of the song was familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it before. An image seemed to flash in his mind. When he tried to grasp it, it was a blur. He acted as if he hadn't heard Yunxi's words. Yunxi's eyes flashed with hidden bitterness. She looked at Ning Xuema in his arms. Ning Xuema seemed to be in a daze. Shui Lan's song made her heart tremble as if it had been scalded. The tune of the lyrics was so familiar that it made her heart palpitate. It was as if she had heard it many years ago, or even sung it, but when she thought about it carefully, she couldn't remember. It was like prenatal education music. When a child grew up and heard the music in his mother's womb, he would feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity and even a faint sense of sadness. Her hand unconsciously tugged at Han Shanyue's clothes, but the wound on her arm was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yunxi's eyes fell on Han Shanyue's left hand. His left hand had been pressing on Ning Xuema's back, and he hadn't forgotten to heal her for a moment. No wonder this girl's wound healed so quickly. The scene in front of Yunxi was undoubtedly glaring to her eyes. Her eyes darkened, and then she slowly smiled. She took 2 steps forward and quietly held onto Han Shanyue's arm. Sir, is this Miss Ning? What happened to her face? Although Han Shanyue and Yunxi were friends, there weren't many opportunities for them to be physically close. Usually, before Yunxi could really get close to him, he would quietly retreat. He had a serious obsession with cleanliness. He didn't want to have physical contact with anyone, not even his friends. Even Rongyue Tianlan, who wasn't very reliable, didn't dare to touch him. Normally, Yunxi wouldn't dare do it. At most, she would pull on his sleeve occasionally. However, after he glanced at her, she didn't even dare to pull on his sleeve. However, after this meeting, her attitude towards him seemed to be different. She would intentionally or unintentionally get close to him. This time, she even had the guts of a leopard and directly held his arm. Han Shangyue subconsciously flicked his sleeve. Yunxi's arm went numb, and she couldn't help but let go. She also took 2 steps back. Her expression changed slightly. In fact, she had mustered up her courage to do this. She thought that since he was carrying Ning Xuemo in his arms, he would allow others to get close to him. She didn't expect, she pursed her lips and couldn't help but look at Ning Xuemo. However, she saw that her eyes were also looking at her. There seemed to be a light flickering in her eyes, as if she was proud of herself, but also as if she was mocking her. Yunxi's face turned pale. She felt as though she had been slapped silently. Hatred flashed through his usually merciful heart, her fingers clenched in her sleeves. This woman was clearly an ordinary person. What right did an ant-like race have to compete with her? She could crush her to death with just a finger. After all, she was a person who had cultivated for thousands of years. Although her heart was in turmoil, she didn't show it on the surface. In fact, she had wronged Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo's eyes had only unconsciously landed on her. In fact, she was still in a daze. Chapter 563. Ning Xuemo was trying her best to figure out the origin of the song. How could she be in the mood to mock Yunxi? Shui Lan had already walked far away, leaving only a small black dot behind. Her gaze was still fixed in that direction, somewhat absent-minded. Han Shangyue looked down and noticed her expression. His eyes darkened slightly, and he quietly turned her in another direction. Ning Xuemo, do you want to maintain this appearance? Or revert to your original appearance? He asked coldly. This sentence immediately pulled Ning Xuemo's thoughts back to reality. Maintain this appearance. It would be better to just kill her. She immediately hugged one of his arms. Master Han, you have a way, right? Han Shanyue's lips curled up slightly. He was secretly satisfied with her actions, but his face remained cold. I do have a way, but the price is not small. What price? Ning Xuemo blinked and looked at him with a slight smile. With Master Han's abilities, you shouldn't care about any price, right? I'm very calculative, and I never do things that are useless. I don't do things that lose money. Han Shanyue's voice was still cold and indifferent. Ning Xuemo secretly gritted her teeth. Was this bastard trying to take advantage of her? She raised her arm and looked at it. It seemed to be wrapped in a layer of old person's real skin. She also knew simple disguise techniques. She should be able to remove these things herself, right? She didn't want to be threatened by him. She opened her mouth to speak, but a blue shadow flashed in the distance. Kirin was running over as fast as it could. Master, I can sense Master's aura. It shouted as it ran. When it suddenly saw this scene, it was stunned. Then, it suddenly came over and sniffed Ning Xuemo's aura. Moss. Master. Little apple. Ning Xuemo reached out and touched the horn on its head. Kirin's body stiffened, and it looked as if it had been struck by lightning. Master, we haven't seen each other for a day. How did you become so old? Ning Xuemo was speechless. Don't spout nonsense. Your master was disguised by that pervert Shui Lan. I won't grow old. She was still a delicate flower, a budding age. How could she grow old overnight? But master, your voice is so old. She sounded no different from a real old lady. I was probably forced to take some medicine. I'll do some research on it later. I'll recover. Ning Xuema was full of confidence. She also knew how to make voice-changing drugs, so naturally, she knew how to neutralize it as well. The little Qilin was finally relieved. Are you sure you can handle it? Han Shangyue, who had been ignored, asked. He should be able to, right? She only needed to remove the scab on her body and take some medicine to restore her voice. Ning Xuema nodded. Han Shangyue looked at her with a faint smile and said, I'll wait and see. Then he turned around and left with her in his arms. Sir, what about these girls? Yunshi asked from the side, pointing at the 3 girls who were still sitting in the carriage. Han Shangyue seemed to have just noticed the 3 girls. He glanced at them and said indifferently, Yunshi, I'll leave them to you. Then, he strode away. Yunshi's expression changed slightly. These 3 girls were under Shuailan's hypnotic spell. Yunshi did have a way to neutralize it, but it would take some time. Her body suddenly swayed and leaned against the snow lion. She let out a low moan. Her voice was neither loud nor soft, so Han Shangyue, who had just walked a few feet away, could hear it. Chapter 564. Han Shangyue turned around and his gaze fell on Yunshi. Her face was slightly pale and there was cold sweat on her forehead. She seemed very weak. There weren't many people that Han Shangyue treated as friends, and Yunshi was one of them. It was rare to see her so weak, so he was naturally concerned and looked over. Seeing that she had finally attracted his attention, Yunshi pursed her lips slightly and straightened her body. She said apologetically, I'm fine. It's just that I was a little out of breath when I was cultivating yesterday. I was also a little tired last night. I'll be fine after some rest. I'll dispel the bewitching spell for them later. Her words were very considerate. Han Shangyue didn't say anything. He placed Ning Xuema on Kirin's back and let her sit sideways. He instructed her, be good and wait here. He walked back and reached out to feel Yunshi's pulse. Her pulse was indeed a little weak and messy. It was a sign that her breath had diverged. Yunshi looked at his lowered eyebrows and her heart thumped wildly. After knowing him for so long, she had very few chances to have physical contact with him. She had achieved success in her cultivation and had 2 great gods as her friends. There was almost no chance of her getting hurt or sick. Occasionally, when she got sick or injured, Rongyue Tianlan could easily treat her. She didn't even have the chance to pretend to be weak. Perhaps the threesome was indeed a mistake. If she wanted to pursue him, she had to seize all kinds of opportunities to be alone. For example, yesterday, because she was a little upset, her breath had diverged while she was cultivating. She had almost gone mad. Before she could recover, she had been caught by Han Shangyue. After running around with him for half the night, her body was indeed a little weak. His fingers rested on her wrist. It was slightly cold. Her heart was burning with passion. She lowered her eyes slightly and didn't dare to show any emotion. However, her slightly red cheeks betrayed her excitement at the moment. Calm down and get rid of all distracting thoughts, Han Shangyue said in a calm voice. Yunshi's heart skipped a beat. She knew that he was going to use his telekinesis to heal her body. It was a rare opportunity for him to heal her, so Yunshi naturally didn't want to let it go. She nodded obediently. Okay. After saying that, she was still worried. Sir, you've been running around all night. Can your body still take it? Let Yunshi recuperate on her own. Yunshi doesn't want you to use too much telekinesis. It's all right. Han Shangyue only said 2 words. He raised his hand, and a futon appeared on the ground. Sit and meditate. Yunshi's heart warmed as she smiled. Her smile was like a beautiful flower blooming gently. Then Yunshi will accept your offer. Sure enough, she sat down on the praying mat. While she was adjusting her breath, she quietly glanced at Ning Xuema, who was not far away. Ning Xuema, who was sitting on Kirin's back, saw everything, but she didn't care. She was chatting with Kirin in a low voice. Although they had only been separated for one night, Kirin felt as if they had been separated for a year. She had a lot to say. Without waiting for Ning Xuema to ask, it spilled the beans from a bamboo tube and told her everything that happened that night. Kirin loved to gossip. Moreover, Yinshi had intentionally or unintentionally talked about her relationship with Han Shangyue in front of her. It seemed like they were very, very good friends who had accompanied each other for countless years. At this time, Kirin's words were implied. Ning Xuema listened and nodded slightly. She glanced at Han Shangyue. So this person also had friends. Chapter 565. She thought that Han Shangyue was so powerful that he didn't have any friends. No wonder there was a saying that Qin Hui had 3 childhood friends. It seemed that this saying was true. She saw that Han Shangyue was about to sit on Yunshi's back and heal her. She didn't know how long this delay would take, so she might as well bring Kirin into the city first and find an inn to get rid of the old lady's skin. She was also someone who loved cleanliness. Now that there was an additional layer of old lady's skin on her body, she felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't wait to clean herself up and take a bath. She took advantage of the fact that Han Shangyue had just sat down and had yet to circulate his energy. She rode Kirin over and said, "Master Han, you go ahead. Little Apple and I will find an inn in the city to wash up." She felt that since Han Shangyue had just saved her, it was only right for her to inform him before leaving. However, just as she spoke, Han Shangyue waved his sleeves at her and said, "Be good and stay here. Don't be nosy." A faint white light enveloped Ning Xuema, and her body became weak again. Ning Xuema was speechless. Wasn't this person too unreasonable? He wanted to heal his friend, so why did he have to drag her along to watch? Forget it, since he had saved her from the fire pit, she wouldn't argue with him over such trivial matters. Since he wanted her to watch, then she would just watch. It was a good opportunity to learn another skill. In this perverted continent, having one more skill would increase one's chances of success. She sat lazily on Kirin's back, and her eyes fell on the two of them. She wanted to learn. Han Shangyue raised his head and glanced at her. He didn't know why, but his heart was faintly unhappy. However, it was rare for her to be so obedient, so he couldn't say anything wrong with her. He didn't know what was going on with him recently, but his usually calm mind was somewhat unstable. Especially when it came to matters related to her, his mood became even more unstable. "You want to learn how to heal people?" Ning Xuema nodded and admitted honestly, "I want to learn." He had healed people on the road, so this skill shouldn't be a secret, right? "You think you can learn just by sitting there?" Han Shangyue raised his eyebrows. When he was treating someone, his palm would be pressed on the person's back without moving. He relied entirely on his psychokinesis to circulate in the injured person's body. He knew where he should circulate his psychokinesis first, where he should not circulate it, and where he should not circulate it. These were all very important, but they could not be understood from the outside. The onlookers could not see where his psychokinesis was flowing to at all. She was learning from so far away. Not a chance at all. In fact, Ning Xuema also somewhat understood this principle. She knew that even if she looked carefully, she might not be able to see through it. However, it was a little boring to sit here. She also had the thought that she could understand as much as she could. Hence, when she heard Han Shanyue's question, she answered honestly, "Whatever I can learn is good. You know, I'm very smart." Han Shanyue was speechless. She was really narcissistic. However, what she said was true. She was indeed very smart. "Come here," he said directly, and with a wave of his sleeve, he released her from her restraints. "What are you doing?" Ning Xuema was puzzled. Wasn't he treating his friend? Did he need someone to help him with this kind of treatment? However, looking at Han Shanyue's expression, if she didn't go over, he probably wouldn't give up. Since he was her savior, she would listen to him this time. Chapter 566. When necessary, Ning Xuema was very obedient. She walked over. As she walked, she realized that there were several holes in her skirt and pants, and a cool breeze was blowing in. Needless to say, she had worn them out when she had been desperately trying to rush the carriage. She hadn't had time to check them. She felt that something was wrong, so she looked down and heaved a sigh of relief. The holes were around her knees and the bottom of her pants. Apart from slightly affecting her appearance, there was no danger of her being exposed. Furthermore, she looked like an old woman with one foot in the grave, so there was nothing to be exposed about. She walked over to Han Shanyue. "Master Han, what instructions do you have for me?" Han Shanyue conjured another praying mat. "Sit." Ning Xuema didn't know what he was up to. She looked at Yunxi and then at Han Shanyue in confusion. Yunxi was also confused. She turned to look at Han Shanyue and asked, "Sir, what is this?" Han Shanyue didn't seem to be bothered to explain, so he only said, "Sit properly and regulate your breathing." Yunxi didn't dare disobey him, so she sat up straight and tried her best to regulate her breathing. Han Shanyue sat behind her. Yunxi only felt joy and peace, but with the addition of the senile Ning Xuema, she felt somewhat uncomfortable and almost couldn't concentrate. Han Shanyue clearly sensed her unstable state of mind, so he said faintly, 3 flowers at one's prominence, 5 hearts at one's origin. As he recited a string of incantations, his palm pressed against her back. Psychokinesis slowly flowed in, forcibly helping her to calm down. Yunxi's heart warmed. She closed her eyes and abandoned all distracting thoughts. She sensed his psychokinesis and let her own psychokinesis merge with his before following him. His psychokinesis was vigorous and boundless. After the yang qi entered her body, wherever it passed, the muscles and meridians that had been slightly damaged due to qi deviation finally began to slowly recover. This time, Han Shanyue was especially talkative. Every time he helped Yunxi circulate her meridians, he would calmly explain the principle and the next step to take. Ning Xuema sat beside him and listened to his explanation. She benefited greatly. This great god's treatment was different from that of an ordinary doctor. It was completely different from what she had learned in the past. However, there was also the wonder of achieving the same goal through different means. She looked at the light emitted from his palm. It was no longer the usual white light, but a faint green light. Needless to say, he was using the wood element of telekinesis. He was indeed a god. Other people only had 1 or 2 types of psychokinesis, and even if they cultivated for a lifetime, they might not reach the peak. He, on the other hand, had cultivated all 5 elements. Moreover, he was very familiar with each element and could use them as he pleased. No matter how smart a genius was, it was impossible for him to reach this level. Unless he lived long enough and had an endless amount of time, he would have plenty of time to cultivate these things. This person, I'm afraid he's far older than 70 or 80, right? 1,000 years old. Long live. Tens of thousands of years old. She was slightly distracted. Suddenly, his hand tightened around her wrist. Distracted. Ning Xuema suddenly regained her senses and couldn't help but glance at Han Shanyue. This guy was treating someone's injuries. Shouldn't he be concentrating at this time? He was actually able to sense her momentary distraction. This was too abnormal. She coughed and wanted to withdraw her hand. This. No, you can continue. Han Shangyue glanced at her. He had no intention of letting go of her wrist. Instead, he pulled her small hand over and pressed it on Yunqi's back. You have to sense the flow of this psychokinesis yourself. You can't be distracted again. Chapter 567. Ning Xuema was speechless. Almighty, this isn't good, is it? Isn't this using Miss Yunqi as a living teaching material? Before she could say anything, Han Shanyue's palm was already superimposed on the back of her hand. His telekinesis was first transmitted to her palm, then from her palm to Yunqi's body. This was an extremely novel experience. Furthermore, this kind of experience wasn't available all the time. Although Ning Xuema vaguely felt that it wasn't very kind to treat Yunqi this way, she couldn't resist now, so she might as well learn seriously. In any case, when she had studied medicine in her previous life, she had done countless internships with men and women from all walks of life. Now that she had a fairy sister, it was a very rare experience. This kind of teaching method was extremely effective. Ning Xuema could almost feel the frequency and speed of the telekinesis flow. She could also sense the subtle reactions of the other party's meridians when the telekinesis washed over them. She had first-hand information. Fortunately, Yunqi had already entered a meditative state and had entered a state of complete selflessness. She didn't even realize that she was being taught medicine as a living teaching material. Otherwise, she would have been so angry that she would have vomited blood. Yunqi's injuries weren't considered serious. Han Shanyue helped her recuperate 3 times with his telekinesis before her damaged meridians were finally restored to their original state. Now that Yunqi had recovered, Ning Xuema had benefited greatly. Her medical skills had improved imperceptibly. After the recuperation, Han Shanyue finally stopped and removed his hands from Yunqi's back. Ning Xuema naturally removed her hands without batting an eyelid. She was about to walk away without batting an eyelid when Yunqi opened her eyes. She sensed her body and realized that all the soreness caused by the crossroads had disappeared without a trace. She had completely recovered. She glanced back at Han Shanyue and smiled. Thank you, sir. Her eyes were full of smiles. After saying this, she glanced at Ning Xuema with a trace of delight in her eyes. She couldn't hide it. Ning Xuema smiled back at her. Her smile was very gentle. She looked like an old woman now, but her smile made her look very amiable, like an old granny. Yunqi felt that her smile was a little strange, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Ning Xuema gave her a comforting smile and was about to slip away when Han Shanyue grabbed her wrist again. How much of what I just taught you do you remember? Why did he have to rub salt into her wound? Big brother, you'll hurt the beauty's heart. Ning Xuema chuckled and said vaguely, I remember everything. Thank you for your guidance. Then tell me, which are the important acupoints? What percentage of psychokinesis do I have to use? Han Shanyue obviously did not want to let her off. Like a strict teacher, he wanted his student to answer his questions. Yunqi seemed to have heard something, and her pretty face turned pale again. She looked at one person and then another, and a bad feeling arose in her heart. Ning Xuema was defeated by Han Shanyue. This person's ability is definitely heaven-defying, but his EQ seems to be heaven-defying as well. She wanted to withdraw her hand, but she was not as strong as him. With this tug, she stumbled and almost fell into his arms. Why are you hiding? You can't answer. Han Shanyue's face darkened. Ning Xuema felt a little sad. Was Han Shanyue treating her as a concubine or a disciple? Forget it, it seemed that it would not be right if she did not answer today.